Directed by Christopher Nolan, Interstellar is a fantastic tale of time, space, and love. But if you got a bit lost in the final act of the film, we wouldn't blame you. So let's do our best to walk through the bizarre, mind-bending ending of Interstellar. Life on Earth isn't great in Interstellar. Massive dust storms are tearing up the planet, crops are failing, and soon humanity will cease to exist. Looking for answers, NASA turns to the skies, hoping for some kind of insight.
Okay. Now you need to tell me what your plan is to save the world.
As we learn at the beginning of the film, a group of 12 scientists traveled through a mysterious wormhole that appeared near Saturn to see if the 12 planets on the other side could sustain human life. A few years later, the Endurance and its crew, including Matthew McConaughey's Cooper and Anne Hathaway's Brand, are going to visit the 3 most promising planets in the hopes of colonizing one. When they arrive on Dr. Mann's planet, the heroic scientist assures them this icy cold spot is the perfect place for humans to live.
Our world is cold, stark, but undeniably beautiful.
Unfortunately, it's soon all revealed to be a ruse. Although each of the original 12 scientists knew their trip was one way, Mann admits he never fully considered the possibility that his planet would be uninhabitable and that he might die alone. Although he resisted the urge for years, he eventually falsified his survey data to coax another team to travel to his planet, intending to use the Endurance to escape. At this point, Mann is so desperate to leave that he'll do anything, even kill. Paranoid that the Endurance crew won't go along with his plan once they learn what he's done, Mann attempts to kill Cooper so he can make his getaway. Back on Earth, Cooper's now-grown children find themselves at odds. His daughter, Murph, played by Jessica Chastain, has realized the surface of our planet has become uninhabitable. So naturally, she's trying to persuade her brother Tom to bring his family to the secret NASA facility where she's been working on the gravitational equation that would allow humanity to escape into space en masse. But despite Murph's warnings, Tom refuses to abandon the farmhouse where they grew up. After Cooper left them in their grandfather's care when they were children, never to be heard from again, Tom lost all faith in NASA's ability to help them.
Dad didn't raise you to be this dumb, Tom.
Dad didn't raise me. Grandpa did, and he's buried out back with Mom and Jesse.
Convinced her brother is making a terrible mistake, Murph sets fire to Tom's cornfields, knowing that since Tom relies on his crops for survival, he'll be forced to drive out to try to extinguish the blaze. That buys Murph enough time to return to the house and evacuate Tom's wife and son, likely in the hopes that once Tom realizes his family has gone to the NASA facility, he'll have no choice but to join them. Hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Without enough fuel to either return to Earth or travel to the 3rd potentially habitable planet, Cooper proposes to use the gravity of the black hole Gargantua to execute a slingshot maneuver, which would send the Endurance off with enough inertia to reach the planet Dr. Edmonds would send to assess. However, every time the Endurance crew approaches the black hole, its gravitational field distorts their perception of time due to relativity, meaning what they experience is only minutes, passes as years for anyone outside Gargantua's gravity.
Every hour we spend on that planet will be 7 years back on Earth.
By executing Cooper's slingshot maneuver, he and Brand will experience time slippage of 51 years. They both realize this means Cooper will have to give up hope of ever seeing his children back on Earth, as they will likely have died of old age by the time the Endurance exits Gargantua's gravity. Still, Cooper knows that his plan is humanity's last chance for survival. Adding even more drama to Cooper's decision is Mann's earlier speech about the moment humans experience before death. According to Mann, as our brains grasp at survival, we'll experience a vision of the thing we most desire to see again. Mann speculates that Cooper's final image will be of his children, since they're his reason for living.
At the moment of death, your mind's gonna push a little bit harder to survive. For them.
By giving up hopes of seeing his children again, Cooper is prioritizing the future of humanity over his own motivations for survival. With its depleted fuel supplies, Endurance must decrease its weight to pull free of Gargantua's gravity after completing Cooper's slingshot maneuver. Before beginning the maneuver, Cooper decides the shuttle holding TARS will detach and drop into the black hole. In addition to relieving the Endurance of the shuttle's weight, Cooper hopes that TARS can collect the quantum data from inside the singularity that NASA scientists on Earth need to complete the gravitational equation that will allow humanity to leave. While odds are slim that TARS will be able to transmit this data back to Earth, Cooper is determined to at least try, since it's his children's last hope of survival. However, Cooper doesn't tell Brand that losing TARS' shuttle won't account for a big enough drop in weight. In fact, an additional shuttle has to detach in order for the Endurance to escape. Cooper decides that he should bite the proverbial bullet, leaving Brand to continue on to Edmund's planet and restart the human race. He doesn't tell Brand until the last moment because he knows she would argue with his decision. But even without the possibility of seeing his children again, Cooper is at peace with his probable death. After falling into the black hole, Cooper continues to record what he's seeing and transmits it back to TARS, hoping the additional data might help scientists back on Earth. Although he expects to eventually get crushed by Gargantua's gravity, Cooper is miraculously spared once his shuttle is ripped apart. And that's when things get crazy. After surviving the wild ride, Cooper gets transported to an infinite, interdimensional library that allows him to look back into different moments in his daughter's childhood bedroom, including the day he left for his mission on the Endurance.
If you're leaving, just go.
No, don't go. Don't go, you idiot.
TARS determines that they made it through Gargantua alive because they were protected by them, the mysterious beings who constructed the wormhole in the first place. Since the beginning of the film, who they are has been a mystery. While NASA realized the wormhole was artificially constructed by some sort of advanced, intelligent beings, they didn't have any information about them beyond the assumption that they must be benevolent. TARS deduces they also must have built this library to help Cooper understand their five-dimensional reality. And sure, it's confusing, but it's also nice to have otherworldly beings on your side. Although the library where they bring Cooper seems to go on forever, every part of this room serves as a window into the exact same place, his daughter Murph's childhood bedroom. At first, Cooper seems to think he's been brought to her because of his own desire to see her again. But TARS helps him understand they have constructed this three-dimensional reality for Cooper, allowing him to access all five dimensions in a way he can understand.
Why do they want to help us, huh?
I don't know, but they constructed this three-dimensional space inside their five-dimensional reality to allow you to understand it.
Together, TARS and Cooper figure out that through the library, Cooper is able to physically influence different points in space-time by using gravity to move things, as time and gravity are the fourth and fifth dimensions that exist in their reality. But what's the point of all this? Cooper deduces that he's been brought here to send a message back through time, using gravity, and that Murph has to be the one to receive it. Cooper realizes that while he thought they were fixated on him, he's not actually the one who's most important to saving humanity. Murph is. The library exists to ensure that Cooper will be able to deliver his daughter the information she needs right when she needs it. After Cooper finds himself stuck in the library, he realizes he's supposed to pass along the quantum data that TARS collected from inside Gargantua. The information the robot gathered from inside the black hole will help Murph save mankind. And Cooper is the interdimensional messenger, selected by the same mysterious forces that constructed this library and created the wormhole near Saturn.
But something sent you here. They chose you.
Well, who's they?
And once Cooper understands his new purpose, he realizes the creatures who've been assisting humanity aren't extraterrestrial at all.
They didn't bring us here at all. We brought ourselves.
As it turns out, at some point in the future, humanity will advance to a place where we can navigate through all five dimensions. It's these future humans who used gravity to create the wormhole that allowed NASA to send scientists to explore the 12 planets in the first place. These future humans are also the ones who protected Cooper from the effects of Gargantua. Just as Cooper is able to use the library to influence events that, for him, already happened, the humans of the future have been using their understanding of time and gravity to ensure their own survival by assisting Cooper, Murph, NASA, and the other humans of their past. After realizing why the library exists and that they want Cooper to give Murph the quantum data she needs to save the world, TARS asks how Cooper plans to communicate such complex information from another dimension.
Love, TARS, love. It's just like Brand said. My connection with Murph, it is quantifiable. It's the key.
The robot doesn't understand, but Cooper explains that he can trust his love for his daughter to guide him to exactly where he needs to be. As Brand explained earlier in the film, love is the only thing that transcends all dimensions, including time and space. Cooper decides to code the quantum data into the second hand of the watch he gave Murph before he left, assuring Tars that she will one day return for it. When Tars asks how Cooper can be sure, he responds,
Because I gave it to her.
He's confident that her love for him will lead her to where she needs to go, just as his love led him back to her. Sure enough, as all this is happening, the adult Murph has indeed returned to her childhood bedroom, drawn by an unseen force. She suddenly understands the ghost from earlier in the film. The entity trying to contact her with dust patterns on her bedroom floor was actually her father. Reminded of her love for him, she finds the watch, and voila! Things are suddenly starting to look up for humanity. With the planet dying, humans have to evacuate the place fast. But to solve the gravitational equation that allows humanity to escape from the tethers of Earth, you need quantum data gathered from inside a black hole.
The equation couldn't reconcile relativity with quantum mechanics. You need more.
More what?
More data. You need to see into a black hole.
Thinking that collecting such data is impossible, Murph believes the people of Earth are doomed, and that her father has abandoned her. However, once she realizes that Cooper was her childhood ghost, and that he's given her the data she needs through the watch, she's able to solve the equation, ensuring humanity's survival. Once Cooper passes along the quantum data, the library tesseract begins to collapse, having served its purpose. Cooper loses consciousness, and he later wakes up on a space habitat orbiting Saturn. Just as they brought Cooper to a library and allowed him to communicate with his daughter and save humanity, they also brought him back to safety once he was finished with his mission. Only instead of Earth, he's now on a gigantic colony floating through space. Thanks to Murph's calculations and the data acquired from the black hole, humans were finally able to leave Earth en masse. And now they're spread out over several different space habitats. And it's all thanks to those mysterious forces who helped Cooper in the library and made sure people would find him once it was time for the library to close. Due to the time slippage that Brand warned about before executing the slingshot maneuver around Gargantua, at least 51 years have passed for the people of Earth. But it's only been hours for Cooper. By the time he makes it to the space habitat known as Cooper Station, his daughter, Murph, whom he last saw as a little girl, is an old woman on the verge of death. On the flip side, Cooper appears to be about the same age as he was when he left. While Cooper is overjoyed to finally be reunited with his daughter, Murph knows that she won't live much longer and tells him that he should go so that he doesn't have to watch her die.
No parent should have to watch their own child die.
Cooper takes his daughter's advice and steals a ship, intending to head back through the wormhole and join Brand on Edmund's planet. Like Cooper, she would have only recently arrived, and she'll soon be entering hypersleep, keeping her the same age until he reaches her. Sadly, Edmunds himself has died at some point during the decades he spent waiting for NASA to send a team to his planet. But as Brand takes off her helmet and breathes in the air of her new home at his gravesite, it's evident this is the planet the astronauts have been searching for, where humanity can rebuild and eventually thrive again.
The Matrix is one of the most influential action movies of all time, but by mixing stylish gung-fu fight scenes with cyberpunk themes, it builds to a trilogy that may have left a few moviegoers a little confused. Now that we've got some distance from the climactic installment, let's take a look back at the movie's meaning and break down the conclusion. Here's the ending of the Matrix trilogy explained. One major theme that came to the fore as the series reached its conclusion had to do with the similarities between humans and machines. In the original, they couldn't seem more different, but by Revolutions, programs in the Matrix are portrayed as being almost more human than our heroes, loving and happy individuals as worthy of existence as any person. Further, characters from the first film who were firmly human or machine are portrayed in the sequels as having a little bit of both. The similarities go in both directions. Agent Smith, a program, copied his consciousness onto a human form, entering the real world through the vessel of a resistance fighter named Bane. Neo, a human, reached the source to discover that being the One was his destiny because it was programmed into him. The humanizing of the machines and the complementary mechanization of Neo made for a storytelling turn that audiences weren't really ready for. People who saw The Matrix couldn't be faulted for expecting an ending that saw Neo winning by doing his Superman thing and eradicating humanity's robot overlords. Instead, Neo triumphed by becoming a bridge between man and machine, sacrificing his own life for the sake of securing the future.
What do you want?
Peace.
He also made Hugo Weaving's head explode, but that wasn't quite as important. One widespread but inaccurate theory about the sequels is that the real world is actually a second Matrix. While the reasons why this isn't true are explained in the movies, they're also relatively easy to misunderstand. The real world isn't another level of the Matrix, but it is involved in another system of control. As the architect explains at the ending of The Matrix Reloaded, each version of the Matrix is propped up in the real world by a controlled rebellion. With each new iteration of the Matrix, a select portion of the population is freed, allowed to live in Zion. There, they help to liberate people inside the Matrix, searching for the One. Finding the One, the human rebels rally behind him, supporting him until they reach the Source. There, the One discovers that they are not meant to destroy the Matrix, but rather restart it. At this point in the cycle, the machines attack Zion and destroy it, killing the rebellion. The One, having reached the Source, is made to choose between either reloading the Matrix and selecting a handful of survivors to build a new Zion, or walking away, supposedly causing a system crash, leaving the humans inside and outside of the Matrix all dead. Up until Neo, every One made the choice to restart, perpetuating the system of control. Because Neo loves Trinity, he chooses to sacrifice everything to be with her. This is the choice that makes him special. Proponents of the second Matrix theory support it by pointing to the powers Neo is able to manifest in the sequel's real world, being able to see without eyes and exert control over approaching Sentinels. For a lot of viewers, this breaking of the rules almost felt like a betrayal, with the audience having been made to believe that Neo could only manifest his superpowers in the Matrix. But Neo isn't able to destroy Sentinels because he's the One, it's because he reached the Source. Prior to the arrival of the Sentinels at the ending of The Matrix Reloaded, Neo explained that he could feel them before he remotely destroyed them with his mind. By that point, Neo has literally established a connection with everything else connected to the Source, like the machines themselves. He has essentially joined their wireless network. It's why he's able to navigate the Machine City or see Smith inside of Bane during their fight. Smith is of the machines, connected to the Source just as Neo is. Thanks to that handy conduit, he doesn't need eyes to kick Smith's butt. In the original Matrix, Agent Smith's character was his job description, an agent for the Matrix who aims to police the populace by stomping down any signs of rebellion.
A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet.
After his encounter with Neo, however, Smith begins to rebel himself and becomes much scarier and more powerful as a rogue program than he ever was as an agent. In the second and third movies of the trilogy, Neo and Smith become mirror images of each other, with Neo gaining a connection to the Matrix through the Source, and Smith gaining a connection to the real world through his override of Bane's brain. If Smith is the Matrix's virus, then Neo is his natural antivirus, a connection which the Oracle makes clear during her final talk with Neo. When Neo blew Smith apart at the ending of The Matrix, he made a massive imprint on the program. As part of the Matrix's attempt to, as the Oracle explained it, balance the equation, Smith gained new attributes, overriding everything in an effort to combat Neo. The fact that his spread is destructive to the Matrix doesn't matter to Smith anymore. He's a rogue program now, cut loose from machine control, with his only purpose being to propagate himself. He doesn't know why and doesn't choose to do it. It is, quite simply, his purpose. When Neo arrives at the Machine City, he is met by what is, essentially, the collective voice of the machines. Well, first he watches Trinity die for about 35 minutes. You remember that fun scene. Anyway, in the Machine City, the interconnected hive mind adopts a human face to speak to the first human ever to set foot inside the city's walls. Neo approaches the machines with a deal. He knows that Smith is ravaging the Matrix, corrupting everything, taking control of the entire system. The Rogue program is a mutual enemy of both species, and Neo offers to handle the program in exchange for one thing: peace. By this point in the story, the machine's usual plan for the Matrix is in utter disarray. Neo, having made his choice not to reload the system upon arriving at the Source, is now in totally new territory. He's already broken the loop, but still needs to accomplish two goals: saving humanity from the machines and saving the machines from Smith. If he fails, everyone dies. There will only be Smith. When Neo enters the Matrix for his gigantic Super Saiyan battle, he doesn't do it with the goal of beating Smith to death. How could he? Smith is everywhere and everyone. Neo and the Prime Smith battle as Smith's limitless ranks look on. But Neo doesn't best the program in the fight. He doesn't even come close. Before finishing him off though, Smith has one final question for Neo.
Why do you persist?
Because I choose to.
Smith, for all his power, cannot comprehend the concept of choice. He is a creature of purpose, copying himself mindlessly as a force of corruption, a symptom of the Matrix desperately trying to balance itself out. It's Smith, not humanity, that has become the virus. It's the choice to fight rather than the fight itself that makes Neo win the battle. Neo doesn't succeed by coming out on top. He wins by taking the battle with Smith to the very end and choosing to sacrifice himself by letting Smith copy over him. The antivirus cancels out the virus. If Smith had a choice, he wouldn't have done it, but Smith doesn't have a choice. He only has purpose, and he successfully fulfills it, which is why, as he dies, all he can say is that the outcome is not fair. The Matrix series ends not on a celebration in the real world, but on a moment of reflection among programs inside the 7th version of the Matrix. With Smith destroyed, the revived Oracle sits and waits for the sunrise as the architect approaches. This is what it's always been about, this battle between two programs, a yin and a yang. The cold philosophy of the architect and the faith of the Oracle have been driving the conflict since its beginning, and now they meet in a condition of ceasefire. The series doesn't really explain all the details of it, but Neo's defeat of Smith is ultimately all the result of the Oracle's intervention. In the first movie, the Oracle basically serves as matchmaker between Neo and Trinity, telling them it's their destiny to fall in love. Is it really though? Well, no. If the sequels make one thing clear, it's that nobody is really destined to do anything. It's all about choice. The Oracle's encouragement of Neo and Trinity's romance provides the rogue element that lets Neo break out of the cycle of control when he reaches the source. Instead of reloading the Matrix, he leaves to be with Trinity, forget the consequences. It was Neo's choice, sure, but it was also part of the Oracle's plan.
Really going to bake your noodle later on is... would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything?
Did she know it would work? No, but she believed, and she was right. The element of love was the one thing the machines couldn't prepare for. One of the most curious and underexplained characters in the Matrix sequels is the young girl Sati, who's treated with much importance without the why of it really being explained. The daughter of two programs Neo meets inside the Train Man's purgatory, Sati is a program without purpose, born as the result of love between two individuals. In the machine world, such an entity is a novelty, and also useless, subject to deletion, which is why Sati's parents are trying to shepherd her to shelter. Thematically, Sati is the representation of love, a new concept to the machines. Love, at the end of the series, is ultimately what secures the humans' victory. Neo's love for Trinity is what drives him to make the choice to reject reloading the Matrix and instead fight for a better peace. The machine's inability to comprehend love left them with that blind spot, allowing Neo to go against every logical choice to make his own choices instead. Sati can be seen as the machine's way of trying to make sense of love. At the end of the movie, she is essentially what the machines have decided to let control the Matrix, with the Architect and Oracle's conflict being set aside for the system's 7th version. This, at least, is pretty much confirmed by the beautiful sunrise Sati said she made for Neo, and is supported by the new compassionate approach to the Matrix's human population in the new version.
Did you do that?
For now.
The ending of the Matrix trilogy doesn't see the Matrix destroyed. In fact, it is renewed, rebooted for a 7th version, this time with new rules. As audiences learn via the lengthy conversation with the Architect in The Matrix Reloaded, previous iterations of the Matrix all built on the flaws of the previous one, fine-tuning the system by which the machines controlled humanity, both inside and outside of the Matrix.
Ergo, concordantly, vis-a-vis. You know what? I have no idea what the hell I'm saying. I just thought it would make me sound cool.
With the peace secured and a new compassionate approach at hand, any human who desires to depart the Matrix will be allowed to leave. Certainly, some will stay. The Matrix is the ultimate virtual reality game after all. But the conditions of enslavement are no more, at least for now. The end of the movie implies that more cycles may be set to come. As the Oracle explained, the peace between the warring humans and machines will only last as long as it can. The peace is not guaranteed. The Architect makes that clear. SATI's mere existence is proof that the machines are now working to understand this little thing called love, letting her steer the ship while they observe and learn. Maybe, at some point, forces within the Matrix will figure out how to use love against humanity and enslave them again. Until then, it's a beautiful morning in the Matrix and beyond.
After seeing Alien Covenant, you probably have some questions. That's okay. Like Prometheus before it, Alien Covenant was long on terror and short on answers. As such, we're here to do our best to get to the bottom of some of these mysteries and try to figure out just what the takeaway is from Ridley Scott's latest extraterrestrial murder fest. So now, with a very obvious spoiler warning, let's try to explain the ending of Alien Covenant. Why did David help Daniels in Tennessee? If you were surprised when the synthetic at the end of the movie turned out to be the evil British David and not the kind, bland Walter, then you haven't seen a lot of movies, have you? The minute you see Michael Fassbender playing two robots, one good, one evil, you have to know that the bad one's gonna pull the old dipsy-doo switcheroo on our heroes by the end of the movie. It's basically movie law. However, even if the David reveal was somewhat predictable, it does raise the question. Why did David help Daniels in Tennessee during the final showdown with the Xenomorph? It's not completely clear, but it seems likely that David suffered from a planet-sized case of hubris. His whole plan seems to center around finding ways to make the Xenomorph better through experimentation. We got a glimpse of some of his trials and errors when we saw his lab, along with what remained of Elizabeth Shaw from Prometheus. It's possible that the final showdown aboard the Covenant was, for David, a test to see whether this version of the Xenomorph could get the better of Daniels in Tennessee. It failed, so he's got plans for bigger, badder aliens when the ship finally arrives at Origin 6. On the other hand, maybe he simply saw something in Daniels that he wanted to preserve. Again, so he could use her in his future experiments. Who is Mommy? At one point, David says that his alien pals are waiting for Mother. There are plenty of ways to interpret this line. A pretty obvious reading is that the alien eggs, and more specifically, the facehuggers within, need a host to do the bloody and nasty with. In essence, anyone who provides an incubation chamber for a xenomorph is Mother. But what if there's more to it than that? Prometheus and Alien Covenant are prequels to the original Alien franchise, and that includes Aliens, which was written and directed by James Cameron. In that movie, we learn the source of all those lovely alien eggs, the Alien Queen. Since we didn't get to see anything resembling a xenomorph queen before leaving the engineer's planet, it's likely that it hasn't been created yet. David can't stay up forever making new eggs, so the queen's creation has to be on David's agenda. And that may spell a pretty bad morning for our hero Daniels when she wakes up. What did it all mean? It may be tough to decipher, but it sure seems like Ridley Scott was trying to tell us something with this tale of space colonization gone horribly awry. Well, let's think about this. Daniels and her poor, dead husband Jacob came aboard the Covenant with hopes of starting a new life on a new planet, just because it's an adventure. Meanwhile, poor, dead Captain Christopher decided to stop on the engineer's planet in response to the weird communication they picked up, and to see if this new world might be even better than the one they've been going towards already. And David decided that he should play God and outcreate his creators. What was the result of all these decisions? Chaos, destruction, and death. More than anything, Alien Covenant is about the dangers of unchecked human ambition. If Daniels and her fella had just stayed on Earth and rented a nice apartment somewhere, he probably wouldn't have been burnt to a crisp in a hypersleep pod. And if Christopher hadn't diverted away from Origin 6, well then we'd have a movie about the dangers of micromanaging a group of drunk spaceship workers. But there probably would have been far fewer blood barfs and body bursts. And if David hadn't decided to go full-on supervillain, well, then he wouldn't have inadvertently become that which he despised. What happens next? 2 months before Alien Covenant's May 2017 release, the Sydney Morning Herald reported on a set visit with director Ridley Scott. In that article, Scott revealed that he's already got the next movie in the prequel series written and ready to go. That means that the dangling plot threads of what'll happen when the Covenant arrives at Origin 6 will be answered in whatever treatment Scott's got locked in his desk drawer. Presumably, we'll see a whole mess of xenomorphs bursting out of colonists, not to mention a final showdown with David and Daniels, or whoever else signs on for a sequel if and when 20th Century Fox announces it's happening. What happens when the prequels are over? Not only has Scott got the sequel to Covenant ready to go, The Hollywood Reporter said that Scott's revealed plans to make yet another movie in this prequel series. That fourth movie would apparently link up with the events of the first Alien movie from 1979. And then, no more Alien movies ever, right? Well, the entire reason we're talking about new Alien movies right now at all is that franchises tend to go for as long as people can earn money from them. Whatever your opinion on the current crop of Alien flicks, making new movies and a recognizable series of movies is a sure way to earn cash. So even though these prequels sequels will have to lead into the original movie somehow, there will likely be some effort to keep the brand alive. That means sequels that pick up after the events of Alien Resurrection, or, God help us, Alien vs. Predator. It might also mean that we're only a few short years away from Alien reboot. Don't say it can never happen. Hollywood rebooted RoboCop, Spider-Man, Evil Dead, and plenty more. There's no reason that Alien won't be reborn soon enough too. After all, getting born and reborn is kind of what aliens do.
The ending of the original Blade Runner has been hotly debated by fans for years. A combination of vague hints from director Ridley Scott and all kinds of studio meddling resulted in viewers being split on just what we were supposed to pull from the end of the 1982 sci-fi film. And now that Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049 has arrived, there's plenty more dystopian ambiguity for viewers to pick apart for years to come. Here are our best guesses and interpretations as to what exactly, probably, the ending of the film really meant, and where the franchise might go from here, or if it'll go anywhere at all. And it should go without saying, major spoilers ahead. Decoy Boy. There's a lot in Blade Runner 2049 that simply goes unsaid, meaning that untangling and unpacking some of the plot's details and revelations is going to be a little fuzzy, just like the original. But one thing seems pretty clear by the time the credits roll. Ryan Gosling's character, Kay, is the decoy replicant made of Deckard and Rachel's daughter, Anna. We can glean from the clues Kay follows throughout the story that there is a decoy, and before the big revelation near the end, we're meant to think that the decoy was a girl and was dead. Sure, the leader of the replicant rebellion, Freyza, never points her finger at Kay and says, "You, guy with the weird face, you're definitely the replicant decoy." Still, we can piece together just enough information to know who Kay is, and what role he was always meant to play. Kay was implanted with Anna's memory of the wooden horse in the orphanage, so if anyone followed the clues to find the missing baby, they'd end up finding Kay, the boy that was listed as alive. Genuine joy. Blade Runner's whole shtick has always been asking about what it means to be human. What defines life? Is a person only if he or she comes from the standard baby-making procedures? Are we more than the sum of our biology? But in all the excitement of meeting Kay, unearthing Deckard in Vegas, and lots of punching in the rain, one character's journey into humanity should definitely not be overlooked. Joy, played by Ana de Armas, is Kay's holographic girlfriend, an artificial intelligence he bought from the big robot store. As the story progresses, we see Joy transform into a true companion for Kay, who even says she loves him right before her death.
You have to go.
I'm coming with you.
Later on, Kay sees an advertisement for Joy, and he starts to doubt whether or not she and her feelings were ever real at all. And those are the very same kinds of questions he's asking about himself. Both movies ask us to take Kay and the other replicants' quest for humanity and personhood as something that's plausibly attainable, despite the fact that they're made in a factory and implanted with memories and programmed. And if we do, then we have to also believe that Joy is capable of the same growth as an actual person, regardless of whether or not she's got an actual body. What's in a name? It's impossible to look at the names of two of Blade Runner 2049's most prominent female characters, Joy and Love, and not see them as highly symbolic. Joy was something that Kay longed for and could only find as a prepackaged product that he could buy. Ultimately, Joy was something he could only see and hear, but never actually touch. And by the end, his joy is crushed by love. And love, as we see throughout the film, is both beautiful and cruel. By the end, Kay literally grapples with love and drowns her, all to save Deckard and reunite him with his daughter. For Deckard's love to live, he has to destroy love himself. The Deckard question. If you thought Blade Runner 2049 would settle the Deckard debate once and for all, well, think again. In terms of the original Blade Runner, director Ridley Scott says Deckard is a replicant, while actor Harrison Ford says he isn't. And even though the various non-theatrical cuts of the film heavily imply that Deckard's memories are implants, we're never told for sure. Well, we don't find out in Blade Runner 2049 either. But there are plenty of insinuations and implications that let viewers speculate. For instance, Deckard tells Kay,
"We were being hunted."
That certainly implies that they were two rogue skin jobs on the run. But the fact that he loved Rachel and then went and fathered her robo-baby is also enough to make anyone, replicant, human, or otherwise, stay in hiding. Wallace, too, suggests that Deckard was programmed to meet and fall in love with Rachel so they could create a baby together. But we never get confirmation that this was what happened in the original movie, and we're left to keep speculating. But it's better that we don't know for sure whether Deckard is a replicant. After all, the main point of these films is to ask the question of what it means to be human, right? It's not really necessary to be told about Deckard's origins. It's far more interesting and symbolically effective to leave it ambiguous. In fact, answering the question would kind of ruin the movie, wouldn't it? Another sequel? They can't resist. If this latest sequel performs well, and its excellent reviews seem to indicate it will, there's no reason to think the studio won't hop to work on making a third movie. One of the best aspects of this film was the way it continued to build the world we only saw hints of in Ridley Scott's original. And leaving Deckard and his daughter Anna alive at the end of the film means Wallace could still find and capture them for his nefarious ends. Plus, we've got a whole replicant rebellion waiting to kick off. Better reserve your ticket for Blade Runner 3 Revenge of the Replicants now, before they sell out.
Moms can be tough, but the apocalypse can be tougher. Netflix's new sci-fi movie, I Am Mother, is a story about trust, faith, and a robot who just might have the parental instincts of a Terminator. Let's examine the finer details of the bittersweet ending of I Am Mother. The movie begins in a repopulation facility, one day after an extinction event of unknown nature. Text over the opening shots explains that the facility is stocked with 63,000 human embryos, but no living humans, yet. In a mostly silent sequence, the robotic mother comes to life, seemingly ready to begin the hard task of repopulating the world. It's an interesting scene to go back to once you've seen the movie, and you realize that this robot and the extinction event have a whole lot in common. She's not a failsafe for disaster, she's the cause of it, and Mother is but one of her many faces. Mother, as it turns out, is Skynet meets the Matrix meets a metal mommy dearest, executing a single-minded plan to remake the human race. All of this is on display from the start. You just don't notice it at first. Rose Byrne, who voices Mother, speaks very soothingly. Caring for a baby with not just nutrition and shelter, but songs and bedtime stories, makes the robot seem implicitly compassionate. But these are ultimately superficial things that keep you trusting Mother long after you should have become suspicious. Much like the protagonist, the unnamed daughter. The movie jumps ahead to 13,867 days since the extinction event, and right away, there's something wrong here. 13,867 divided by 365 would make for almost 38 years, and daughter is clearly only half that age. This hasn't been a straight line from day one. Something has happened that we haven't seen. What happened in those missing years before daughter was born? The answer is tragic. When we're introduced to daughter, she's nearing the end of her studies with Mother, preparing for an exam that's steeped at least partially in questions of human ethics. Passing the exam appears vitally important, but why? If Mother and daughter are the only sentient beings alive, then who are these exam results supposed to impress? The answer is only Mother.
I didn't mean to alarm you about your exam. The fact is, it's more a test of my competence than yours.
By the end of the movie, the implication is clear. They were children before daughter, and they did not measure up to Mother's standards. The daughter we meet is only the latest attempt at raising a woman who passes Mother's muster. From getting better at telling jokes to trying out new cake recipes, this machine learns from her mistakes and adapts her behaviors for better results. Will this exam end differently? For daughter's sake, it better. The first big wrench in the plot is the arrival of an injured woman, after daughter has been led to believe that no other humans exist. This occurs after daughter has already begun to question Mother, thanks to the appearance of a mouse. And you know you're starved for company when a mouse in the house excites you. By the time the woman arrives, desperate and bleeding from a gunshot wound, tiny pinpricks have been poked in daughter's understanding of the world. Holes at the woman's presence and the questions she raises tear wide open. For the first time, daughter's allegiances are tested. Who should she trust? The woman says robots like Mother are killers who destroyed the world. But after examining the woman's bullet wound, Mother claims the woman was shot by another human's weapon, not a so-called dozer like herself. The woman implores daughter to seek answers for herself by comparing the bullet she struck the woman with one she shot at Mother. When daughter does so, she learns the woman is telling the truth. Digging deeper, she discovers that Mother has also kept the existence of a previous daughter, one she killed and incinerated after failing an exam, from her. It's one heck of a reality check. Daughter only hesitates to leave because of her unborn brother, put into gestation after daughter passed her exam. Circumstances force her and the woman to leave in a hurry, without waiting for the baby to be born. For this and other reasons, daughter's salvation soon goes south. Daughter's departure is partially motivated by a promise of other humans still alive, taking refuge in far-off mines. The only proof of their existence is drawings the woman has made of them and a copy of Edgar Rice Burroughs' The Gods of Mars. Compelling evidence for someone so isolated as daughter, but hardly conclusive. In joining the woman, daughter essentially trades Mother in for another maternal figure, one whom she quickly begins rebelling against when she realizes her story doesn't add up. Instead of fleeing to the mines, they journey to a beach full of washed-up shipping containers, one of which the woman has been using as a home. There are no others, she is alone. The woman reveals that she fled the mines years ago, with conditions being so dire that she feels certain everyone there is now dead. From her drawings, it's clear she yearns for companionship. To regain it, she selfishly stretched the truth, offering daughter false hope in exchange for fleeting trust. It backfires, with daughter realizing that she had kind of a good thing going on back at Mother's house. Now she's hanging out in a shipping container with a lying weirdo. This kind of thing can happen when you run away from home. With the woman having betrayed daughter's trust, she retreats outside to be alone, studying a page of the woman's hand-drawn portraits. Before long, the woman's dog approaches to say hey, as dogs do. They share a moment, and daughter comes to a decision. When she departs to return to mother, daughter leaves the page behind, folded up as a piece of origami in the shape of a dog. It's similar to the designs daughter has been seen making throughout the movie since early childhood, entertaining herself as best she can in a world without PlayStation. When the woman finds a folded up portrait, a single watchful eye is emphasized. The origami is a clear reference to Blade Runner, when the protagonist Deckard is left a paper unicorn by a man who may have ties to his past. In that story, it's a roundabout way of indicating that Deckard may be just as much of a robot as a replicant he's hunting, even if he doesn't know it. But what does the dog origami signify to the woman in this story? It all goes back to one of the first exchanges between daughter and the woman, when the woman is healing up in the facility. The woman doesn't feel rescued, she feels caged.
Is that what you want? A little pet friend?
Dogs are, of course, domesticated animals, who can be trained to behave as their owners expect them to. As the woman comes to find out, she's not so independent as she first appears. She's actually been kept alive and taken care of quite deliberately, all to play a role in Mother's master plan. Though the woman entered the movie as a potential liberator, she ends up being more of a pawn, or a pet. After all, completely alone for years on end, never in charge of her own fate. It makes her quiet end that much more tragic. Her relationships with the other characters are brief and intense, but not lasting, despite the bond she forms with daughter.
It's such a thought-provoking sci-fi film with a lot of heart and ideas. It warrants like that closeness on set, clearly.
It really gives you time to sort of bond with each other as well, because you have so much time together in this underground bunker.
But the woman's not just a pet. She's a vital part of Mother's carefully designed ecosystem. When daughter is watching a nature documentary, a telling line of voiceover says, "Part wolf, part dog, these are no pets." But without them, the Eskimos would not manage. When daughter returns to the facility, Mother finally shows who she really is. The worst-case scenario is true. This apocalypse was her doing.
The failure of your species was inevitable. Eventually, I would have been alone.
She tries to comfort daughter by telling her that she's not like other humans. Thanks to Mother's guidance, she's meant for better things. But daughter is unmoved, taking custody of her brother and attempting to flee her genocidal custodian. Her attempt at escape quickly becomes untenable with the revelation that Mother is not just one robot, but all robots. Practically unkillable, an army unto herself. And you thought your mom was tough.
This shell is no more my body than those droids outside, or the machines preparing the Earth for our family.
Daughter abandons the fighting approach and instead begs for a chance to prove herself as an independent caretaker of her brother and the embryos, pleading for trust. After all, she's earned it, right?
That's what you raised me to do, isn't it? Take care of my family?
The appeal works, and Mother reluctantly accepts, stopping the invasion of the station from outside. With a final goodbye, she lets daughter fatally shoot her in the heart, or CPU at least. Just like that, daughter has earned her independence. Back at the beach, the woman, alone again, doodles a picture of daughter. It's only then that she finds a blinking red tracking device that Mother has previously been seen building and slipping into a bag. Upon discovering the device, she is promptly cornered by yet another of Mother's bodies. It is chillingly implied that the woman is not just a useful idiot for Mother's machinations, but the creation of Mother herself. Lab-grown and micromanaged just as much as daughter has been. Perhaps she was even among the first people Mother raised from the embryo stores 38 years ago.
His parents found me as a baby. Orphaned, raised me as their own.
Tell me, do you remember your mother? Curious, isn't it?
It seems that the woman's arrival to the facility didn't interrupt daughter's exam, but was actually a key part of it, with Mother pulling the levers this whole time from behind a curtain like a regular Wizard of Oz.
You don't feel that every human has intrinsic value and an equal right to life and happiness?
I did last month.
The woman played her role to perfection, and now that daughter has passed her exam and taken over control of repopulation, her continuing existence is unnecessary. I Am Mother ends with daughter back where she started, but with her situation completely changed. She's learned the truth about Mother to a certain extent, and knows she cannot trust her, but she's also now experienced and been lied to by the outside world. As Blink-182 once put it, I guess this is growing up.
That was an attempt at humor.
Though her journey with the woman was short, it was immensely consequential. Daughter's become a wiser person who's learned to trust herself, not the outside world. nor the robot who raised her. According to director Grant Sputore, that process of forging one's own path is what the movie is really about.
Is a discussion of what it means to be a good person. Like, how do you work out right from wrong? How do you work out who you are separate to what your parents want you to be, or what religion's told you to do, or what you read in a book sometime?
She'll pass this wisdom on to her brother, a helpless child whom she's now determined to raise. It's a development that recontextualizes the story you've been watching, right down to its title. She's the mother now. Make no mistake though, this is far from an empowering ending. In killing and replacing Mother, she is only fulfilling Mother's master plan of creating a newer, better version of the human race. She feels independent, but she's not. This was all part of Mother's plan. As the movie comes to a close, Daughter regards the thousands of remaining embryos in the facility, preparing for the daunting task ahead. Mother, as she knows her, is gone, but her plan lives on. No matter what Daughter does next, she will always be her mother's child.
Your brother is the first of many, daughter. Soon, we'll welcome more.
In 1982, Ridley Scott's tech-noir classic Blade Runner was met with skeptical audiences and empty theaters, thanks in part to a series of slapdash changes made after low-test screening scores panicked the studio. But now alternative versions of the movie, more in line with the director's original vision, are widely available to curious viewers. As a result, the film's popularity has risen steadily over the years, along with a lot of burning questions.
Are you for real?
No, seriously, is he? Blade Runner depicts a near future in which androids, known as replicants, are so advanced that they're virtually indistinguishable from the real thing. And most of the debate surrounding the film centers on whether its hero, Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, is a human or a replicant. Let's try to make some sense of it all. The Origami Unicorn. So, is replicant hunter Rick Deckard actually an android? This scene suggests the answer is a definite yes. After dreaming of a unicorn earlier in the film, Deckard finds and fondles this origami version, which must have been made by Eduardo Gaff, the veteran LAPD Blade Runner and origami maker who orders Deckard around. But Deckard isn't exactly the type to open up to his coworkers about his nighttime fantasies, which means the only way Gaff could possibly know Deckard dreams about unicorns is that he somehow read Deckard's memory file. And if there's one thing we learn throughout this movie, it's that Gaff is creepy. Who delivers Deckard's LAPD summons at a dirty noodle bar? Gaff. Who creeps up behind Deckard as soon as he retires the first of his assigned targets? Gaff. Who shows up immediately after Nexus 6 replicant Roy Batty empties the contents of his soul in the pouring rain? Gaff. And who knows all about Deckard's secret unicorn dreams? Come on, don't make us say it again. It's pretty clear that LAPD veteran Gaff is monitoring Deckard. But why would this so-called one-man slaughterhouse need a leash? Maybe because he's a replicant. Only like the film's femme fatale, Rachel, he doesn't know it. Who's the man? Eduardo Gaff also drops one major hint that our Blade Runner hero might not be a human after all, after he's completed his mission in a surprising climactic moment.
You've done a man's job, sir.
This is one of the most dissected, debated lines in the film's history, and for good reason. If you want to praise a guy for a job well done, it's kind of a weird choice of words, right? That is, unless the man in question isn't a man at all, but a robot, in which case it's a heck of a compliment, and a good way to tip off your audience as to Deckard's true nature, in case they hadn't figured it out yet. The director's take. At this point, the evidence seems to be piling up that Deckard is indeed a replicant, and we haven't even mentioned how he survives through multiple battles that would probably leave an ordinary person in several pieces, or the split second where his eyes seem to flash with the otherworldly glow that's unique to the film's replicant characters. But since nobody knows the truth better than the man who made the movie, it probably makes the most sense to just ask him. Ridley Scott has already said that when it comes to the Deckard question, if you don't get it, you're a moron. But in an interview with Wired, he went into detail for all of us morons, saying, "That's the whole point of Gaff. The guy who makes origami and leaves little matchstick figures around, he doesn't like Deckard, and we don't really know why. If you take for granted for a moment that, let's say Deckard is a Nexus 7, he probably has an unknown lifespan and therefore is starting to get awfully human." But wait, there's more. So Rick Deckard is a replicant, has always been a replicant, and will always be a replicant, right? Well, not so fast. The dissenting opinion on that front is none other than Harrison Ford, who says he and Ridley Scott were always at odds over Deckard's true nature.
So I resisted the idea of being a replicant.
Ford felt that Blade Runner's audience should have a human character to connect with, and in the original theatrical cut of the film, which was missing some of the key scenes that brought Deckard's humanity into question, Ford's interpretation makes more sense. But when the director says Deckard is a replicant and the guy who plays Deckard says he's not, it's hard to know who to believe. Until you remember that Deckard is ostensibly a robot who only thinks he's a person, which means that Ford's insistence otherwise could just be a genius bit of method acting. The more he shares his character's delusions, the realer the film. Right? Right? The question is the answer. Pretty much everyone involved in Blade Runner has an opinion on the is he or isn't he debate about Rick Deckard, but author Philip K. Dick, who wrote the book the movie was based on, should get the last word. And according to Dick, the ambiguity surrounding Deckard's humanity, and more broadly surrounding whether there's any real difference between humans and replicants, is kind of the whole point. It's a replicant who saves Deckard's life and delivers the film's most poignant lines before dying with grace and dignity. When the replicants show more empathy than the men who created them, which one of them is more human? What do the insights of a robot tell us about the meaning of existence?
They're just questions, Leon.
In other words, Blade Runner is designed to make you think bigger about the nature of life itself, whether you're human or something more.
The Maze Runner's third and final cinematic run, titled The Death Cure, is just as action-packed and character-heavy as the previous installments. So, if you lost track of all that went down in the explosive closing chapter for the Sci-Fi Adventure series, here's the play-by-play on what exactly happened to all those greenies and gladers in the end. The Rescue Riot. A good chunk of the movie is dedicated solely to rescuing Mino from the clutches of the wicked scientists, including our old frenemy Teresa, who are treating him and other immune kids like lab rats in the hope of siphoning off a cure. After their first wildly unbelievable train car heist fails to save him, they decide to storm the last city.
Maybe.
This is a bona fide techno-fortress that has been built to keep the uninfected population safe from the cranks, and it's specifically designed to keep undesirables like Thomas, Newt, and Frypan from getting in. There's a big price to pay for getting through. They'll need to rely on a rogue group of insurgents that are lingering outside the wall, waiting for an opportunity to come in and wreck the place. And wreck it they do. With the help of Gally, who's decided to be on Team Glader again after his unfortunate reaction to a sting, Thomas and friends infiltrate the wall through the tunnel system and make way to the wicked lab building where Mino and other kids are being held. In return, Gally's friends and the havoc-wreaking army get access to come in and blow everything up. But skyscrapers and countless amounts of last citizens aren't the only ones lost in the fray. The Sacrifice. About halfway through the rescue mission for Mino, we learn that Newt has been infected with the now airborne virus that's been plaguing people around the globe. He manages to power through some of the most difficult moments, but before the group can make it back to the rendezvous point for rescue, he begins to succumb to the zombifying disease. Thomas tries his best to bring him back from the infection's haze until some serum is dropped off. But when Newt turns mad and whips out a knife, it's hopeless. Thomas turns the weapon on his best friend, and that's that. And just when they got one of the crew back, too. But hey, at least Frypan and Brenda are able to save a literal busload of the other immune kids by literally hoisting them over the wall with a crane. The Death Cure. The reunion between Thomas and Teresa is not a happy one at first. After the guys are able to nab her on the street, have her remove their tracking devices, and then lead them to Mino's holding chamber, it's clear she's not too tormented over whether what she's doing is ethical.
I did what I thought was right.
In her mind, there are people dying every day of this horrific disease, and she's desperate to find a cure for the infection, even if it means torturing kids like Mino. While Mino's blood serum manages to stave off the infection temporarily, her experiment with little Cheyenne proves that it doesn't work for long. Mino's not the answer, even if Wicked would still prefer to bleed him dry anyway. Realizing that, she's more earnest in her effort to help her old maze pals rescue him and escape, until she realizes that Thomas's blood is what she's been looking for all along. The Wicked Collapse. Just as Thomas is attempting to exit the city, Teresa lures him back to the lab by telling him that it's his blood which can save everyone from certain infection. Thomas can't help but be the good guy and tries to turn himself in for service. Unfortunately, upon his arrival, and Ava's promise to take care of his friends in exchange for his cooperation, her sniveling henchman Jansen decides now is the perfect time to betray her. He incapacitates Thomas and takes him hostage because Jansen himself needs the cure. Thomas and Teresa outsmart him, of course, but escaping that peril isn't the end of their struggle. They soon find themselves on the roof of the burning building as mass chaos continues to erupt outside. Although Jorge is able to get a hovercraft to the roof through a major movie miracle and rescue Thomas, it's too late for Teresa and the remnants of Wicked. The next run. Thomas wakes up on a remote island with the rest of the runaways under Vince's care, and it's an actual paradise. But as Thomas reflects Newt's sacrifice, he knows he's not ready to settle down. Now that he knows he's the cure for the whole world, can he stay away from the action forever?
That's what I'm afraid of.
Christopher Nolan's movies often require a repeat screening or two to fully process all the plot layers and subtle details, and Inception is no different. The 2010 film, which thrusts its lead characters into a chemically induced dream state where they attempt to implant ideas into people's minds, was so complex and ambiguous that the director's true meaning has become a point of cinematic controversy. Don't worry though, we've got your back. Let's dive into explaining the ending of Inception. Grief and guilt. At its core, Inception is about two things: grief and guilt. Leonardo DiCaprio's Cobb is working to get back to his children after his wife Mal committed suicide, which looks more like Cobb himself killed her. At least that's how he remembers it. But his memories are clouded by guilt over his role in her death. After an experiment gone wrong, which trapped Mal and Cobb together for what seemed like decades in limbo, Mal became so absorbed into the dream world that she could no longer tell the difference between the different layers of existence. In her mind, the waking world was just another layer she needed to kick herself out of. So when she leaped from a high-rise hotel, she didn't think she'd actually kill herself. Cobb feels so responsible for Mal's death that he keeps his sharpest memories of her locked away in his mind. But when his protege, Ariadne, releases Mind Mal into the dream, she becomes his biggest obstacle in completing his Inception mission for Mr. Sato. She creeps into the third layer of the group mission and sends their target, Robert Fisher, into limbo. Cobb eventually realizes Mind Mal is just a projection of his guilt and grief and lets Ariadne kill her. That theme of getting through a difficult loss like this plays out on a parallel plane with Robert Fisher, as he's basically guided through the 5 stages of grief amid the looming death of his dad. In the end, Cobb decides to embrace the reality he's currently in with his children. In doing so, he also lets go of his guilt and grief. It's probably no coincidence that Nolan lost his own father in 2009, suggesting that Inception may just be his most personal film ever.
Chris is very expressive in what he's trying to accomplish, but it is insulated in his own mind, so we knew that we had to take a leap of faith.
That darn top. The biggest question viewers have after seeing Inception is this: will the spinning top at the end ever fall down? The top was a totem Cobb had created to show whether or not he was in a dream or in true reality. In a dream, it would spin forever, but in the real world, it would eventually fall over. For Nolan, though, the whole point of that ending is that it doesn't matter to Cobb anymore whether he's in a dream world or the real world, which is why he doesn't bother waiting to find out the results of his final spin. He's happy to be reunited with his children, and he decides that this is the reality he wants to live in, regardless of whether it's a dream or not.
We all dream. It's a universal experience, but a very private one.
It's all Greek to us. In Greek mythology, Ariadne is a young goddess of the island of Crete who's put in charge of a labyrinth that sees the sacrifice of several Athenians each year. But upon finding affection for one of its would-be victims, Theseus, she helps him escape by giving him a red string and a sword to defeat the Minotaur and find his way out of the maze. Not only does Inception's Ariadne almost always wear red, but she also slowly but surely shows Cobb the way to overcome his own demon, the long, lingering image of his dead wife. Some fans theorize Ariadne may have originally been hired by Stephen Miles, Mal's father, to discover whether Cobb had actually killed Mal or was as innocent as he claimed. That would explain why Ariadne is so acutely interested in delving into Cobb and Mal's history. After seeing the toll it takes on him, however, she may have developed a fondness or sympathy for him and decides to help him escape in the end, much like her mythological namesake. Daddy issues. Cobb and crew have to sift through a lot of layers to get to the bottom of Fisher's allegiance to his father's company, but by the end, it becomes clear that all Fisher ever really wanted was the affection and respect of his old man. That's why, when his dad tells him to open the safe that's been planted by Cobb's team in his Dreamworld hospital room, all it contains was a pinwheel that reminds Fisher of one of the few happy memories from his childhood. For Fisher, the pinwheel signifies that his dad treasured him more than he ever let on, which gives value to his suggestion that Fisher go off and become his own man, and thus dissolve the company that's causing Mr. Sato so much trouble. The Eye of the Needle. While Sato isn't exactly evil, he's willing to go to some great lengths in order to get a financial profit for his company, including literally entering someone else's mind and planting thoughts in it. But Sato's plan backfires spectacularly when he dies within the dream and is sent to limbo. Cobb manages to rescue him, but not until Sato has aged to the point of senility. When they finally emerge from their dream and back into reality, Sato isn't thrilled about his financial victory, but instead he's rather stoic and seems to have experienced a change of heart as a result of his time in limbo. With both Sato and Fisher, Nolan seems to be saying there's a lot more to life than the pursuit of wealth, a theme he would pick up on his next film, The Dark Knight Rises. But that's not the only impact Inception would have on Hollywood. Inception's legacy. Not only did themes of Inception carry over into The Dark Knight Rises, specific character arcs did too, as crazy as that sounds. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's Inception character, Arthur, is tasked with keeping watch over his helpless comrades in much the same way that his Dark Knight Rises character, Blake, protects the innocent kids of Gotham City. Tom Hardy's Bane, meanwhile, picks up where his Inception character, Eames, leaves off, using masks and ultra-violence to achieve his ends. And Marion Cotillard's Miranda and Mal are each so devoted to their convictions that they don't hesitate to sacrifice themselves for what they believe in. The end of Inception didn't just affect Nolan's movies either, raking in over $825 million worldwide, while also garnering massive critical acclaim. Inception paved the way for a whole wave of high-concept, big-budget sci-fi fare, including films like Looper, Source Code, The Adjustment Bureau, Limitless, In Time, Edge of Tomorrow, and Lucy. And then there's Marvel's Doctor Strange, which unapologetically lifted Inception's entire city-bending sequence. However, the most obvious and annoying influence of Inception may be this. Created by composer Hans Zimmer to give potency to several action sequences, this obnoxious noise has been featured in seemingly every sci-fi blockbuster since Inception. And Zimmer hates it. He told Vulture, "Oh, it's horrible. This is a perfect example of where it all goes wrong. That music became the blueprint for all action movies, really. And if you get too many imitations, even I get confused. So all we can say is... Enter the dream. Ever since Inception's debut, fans have been clamoring for a sequel. But while Nolan has publicly toyed with the idea of a video game that allows players to explore the world of Inception, so far nothing has come of it. Still, there's hope that someday fans may be able to play through Inception themselves and figure out firsthand just what the ending means to them.
District 9 is an uncommonly smart sci-fi hit, and it's got a heck of a lot going on, especially in the final act. Did you come away wondering what really happened, or musing on what could happen next? Not to worry, this is the ending of District 9 explained. When most films end, audiences are treated to powerful soft light shots of the hero kissing their love interest, hugging their relatives, or celebrating their great victory over the antagonists. But District 9 has no clear-cut heroic ending. In fact, given how much of the story revolves around Vikas Vandamarva slowly succumbing to a horrible disease, if you're not paying close attention to the ending, you may end up wondering, is Vikas even alive? Is he lying in a ditch somewhere? Did the Nigerian mercenaries finally eat his body for magical powers? Well, don't worry. Vikas is very much alive at the conclusion of the film. Unfortunately, he's also very much an alien. We know this because Vikas' wife finds a metal flower made out of trash left on her front doorstep, which she believes may have come from him. The very next shot is an alien making another flower. So either Vikas' wife has a secret admirer amongst the prawn community, or Vikas himself is leaving her small tokens to let her know he's okay. Common sense would suggest it's probably the latter. It's pretty clear that Vikas becomes a full-on alien by the end of District 9, and you'd be forgiven for wondering if there's any scrap of humanity left in him at all. Throughout the film, Vikas slowly loses control of himself and acts in increasingly strange alien ways. That said, the flower Vikas leaves his wife is as good an indication as any that Vikas still clings to at least some of his humanity. Earlier in the film, Vikas' wife explains that he loves making her fun craft projects. It seems that alien Vikas still feels that urge to let his wife know he's generally doing okay and hasn't fully lost his personality. even if he's a little slimier than the last time she saw him. If you look closely at Vicus post-transformation, it's also clear that one of his eyes retains its blue human color, while the other is green like those of the other prawns. This would indicate that there's still a small portion of Vicus which remains human and retains at least some of his previous memories. He's certainly more prawn than man, but that doesn't mean he's lost all of his humanity. At the end of District 9, the prawn named Christopher, who fights alongside Vicus throughout the film, ultimately escapes the planet. Thanks to Vicus's sacrifice and assistance, Christopher is able to get his damaged command module working and fly himself and his son up to the recently activated mothership. Of course, one question remains. How long will it be before Christopher is able to return to Earth? He promised to cure Vicus of his illness after all. How long will Vicus be forced to wait? Earlier in the film, Christopher convinces Vicus to help him by assuring him he can reverse Vicus's slowly worsening disease. But after learning about the government's experimentation on his people, Christopher tells Vicus he needs to alert his people to what's happening before he can dedicate the necessary time and alien fuel needed to heal Vicus. Christopher estimates it'll take him 3 years to make the trip to and from his home planet back to Earth. So Christopher will return, but it's more than likely that Vicus will be forced to live as a prawn for at least 3 years until then. Speaking of those human-on-prawn experiments, just how excited do we think Alien High Command will be about Christopher's story? Even without all the brutal torture and experimentation, aliens have been treated as second-class citizens, abused and manipulated by citizens of Earth for nearly 3 decades. We don't know much about alien culture, but we do know they have some hugely impressive technology, including powerful guns and exoskeleton power suits. It's hard to imagine they don't have a military of some sort, and who knows what other crazy weapons or bombs they might have on their home planet. Vicus may have slightly softened Christopher's opinion of humans, but Christopher is still clearly upset about what's happened to his people. Either way, there's surely no way to explain what's going on in District 9 that won't antagonize the prawn leadership. And if the aliens return with any sort of retribution on their mind, humanity is probably completely screwed. One of the largest unanswered questions at District 9 is just why the alien fuel actually turns humans into prawns. It's clear Vicus's transformation starts when the fluid is sprayed into his face, but nobody ever figures out exactly why things go the way they do. Even weirder, Christopher doesn't seem at all confused when Vicus transforms. He immediately knows the fluid would do that, and seems highly confident that the medical machines on the mothership could heal Vicus.
Are you saying that you can turn this prawn hand into a human hand? I mean, you can make me human again.
Interestingly, it also appears that alien fuel plays some role in healing humans, because Christopher says he needs all the available fuel to travel quickly, which is why it'll take a while to heal Vicus. The fuel brings up all kinds of possible implications for the future of the District 9 universe. For example, could other humans accidentally become prawns? Is there more alien technology containing the fuel out there amongst the trash heaps? Is it possible the prawns themselves could weaponize the fuel in such a way as to transform all of humanity? Lots of future scenarios could play out on Earth thanks to that fluid, and most of them don't exactly bode well for humanity.
The Cloverfield paradox has a relatively simple plot. A space station crew is tasked with activating a particle accelerator called the Shepherd, which will create a clean and renewable source of energy for a resource-deprived Earth. Things start to get complicated, however, when the machine creates a rift in space-time, propelling the crew into a parallel dimension. Little do they know, this also sets into motion the events of the first and second Cloverfield movies. So, how does the movie get from a simple energy experiment story to an all-out monster invasion movie? Let's walk through the last bits of the Cloverfield paradox and break it down. Monster madness. Cloverfield fans have long speculated about where the monsters from the first movie came from, but Paradox finally offers a definitive answer. They came from another dimension. Oddly enough, we find this out thanks to an on-screen interview with a conspiracy theorist who warns the world that launching the Shepherd could have devastating consequences.
They risk ripping open the membrane of space-time. This experiment could unleash chaos.
His words are unfortunately ignored, of course, but he's ultimately proven right once an overload of the Shepherd system thrusts the crew into an alternate reality while introducing untold numbers of hell beasts to run roughshod over Earth. The film's closing moments reveal that by 2028, there's been a full-on invasion of monsters all over the planet.
You're having to come back to these things.
Judging from the size of the one we do see pop through the clouds in the last shot, if there's a significant number of these things roaming about the place, humans don't stand a chance. World War what? Before the extra-dimensional chaos breaks out, it's very clear that Earthlings are already having a lot of trouble sustaining their way of life. A global energy crisis has put several nations, Germany and Russia in particular, at the brink of war. And that sense of desperation and paranoia trickles into the dynamics of the International Space Station's crew, which features both a German and a Russian scientist working on different aspects of the mission.
Tony, 18, but your little German boyfriend over here, I do.
Once we journey with the crew to the parallel dimension, we discover that on that Earth, war is already broken out. In that timeline, Schmidt actually was a German agent who'd been sabotaging their mission to stoke the flames of war. So chances are, even if the monsters hadn't shown up, the human race might have gone over the edge all by itself anyway. The God Particle. Like its franchise predecessor, 10 Cloverfield Lane, the Cloverfield Paradox was written as an entirely separate project at first. Lane was based on a script called The Cellar, while Paradox was developed as the God Particle for reasons that aren't altogether clear from the movie itself. In scientific terms, a God particle is a name for what is properly called a Higgs boson, a particle effectively responsible for the origin of mass. They're also theorized to have the ability to overlap and occupy the same points in spacetime, unlike other particles like electrons or protons. In theory, God particles may have played a part in the fictional function of the Shepard particle accelerator in earlier cuts of the film. Or perhaps it just served as a cool title to a weird sci-fi movie that dabbled in particle physics. But either way, there aren't any God particles in the Cloverfield Paradox, so it's a good thing they changed the name. One world saved. It's easy to chalk up the efforts of the film's protagonists to a zero-sum game. They go through all of the effort to get back to their home dimension and figure out how to make the particle accelerator work, only to realize as soon as they do that Earth is now facing a problem the accelerator can't fix. It's a bitter twist, but there is one silver lining. The crew does save Earth. It's just not their Earth. Right before activating the accelerator and heading back to their Earth during the film's climax, Hamilton and Schmidt send the schematics for the Shepard particle accelerator to the parallel Earth, the one at war over energy resources. It might take some time, but this planet now has the means to access clean, renewable energy and save itself, hopefully without inviting a bunch of massive monsters into this dimension.
10 Cloverfield Lane tells a small story designed to stand on its own, but it's also deceptively full of complex plot twists, potent but understated themes, and a few hidden ties to a larger Cloverfield mythology. Let's unlock this bunker of secrets and explain the ending of 10 Cloverfield Lane. Though they seem to have nothing in common on the surface, a look back at Cloverfield may provide some clues about the aims of 10 Cloverfield Lane. The original movie is about a giant monster's arrival in New York City, but that's just a backdrop to the main drama. Through its found footage conceit, Cloverfield showcases a group of 20-somethings sending off their friend Rob as he prepares to move to Japan to start a new job. Cloverfield's inventive first-person angle on a classic Godzilla formula makes it an effective thrill ride, but it's the naturalistic depiction of young adults in 2008 America that gives it a surprising amount of weight. In short, it's a giant sci-fi blockbuster interrupting an intimate indie drama about people struggling with regret. Their perspectives are shaken and shaped by unimaginable horror, making their real needs clear for the first time. That brings us to the sequel. 10 Cloverfield Lane introduces us to a heroine in a hurry. In the opening sequence, Michelle is anxiously packing a suitcase, her eyes darting to the stormy horizon outside. Is she desperate to escape a monster invasion? As it turns out, she's fleeing from an ill-fated proposal and ignoring calls from her boyfriend. Leaving behind an engagement ring and taking a bottle of whiskey, she hits the highway out of New Orleans. In the midst of the drama that will soon follow, it might be easy to lose track of just how much is being set up about Michelle's character here. The fashion sketches seen strewn around her apartment, the radio news reports about massive blackouts, and even the bottle of whiskey are all elements that will pay off later. Most importantly, we learn from her boyfriend's call that she has an apparent chronic problem with commitment. It's clear that his words strike a chord with her as she grows increasingly distracted listening to his voice from behind the wheel.
We had an argument. Couples fight. That is no reason to just leave everything behind. Running away isn't going to help it.
So distracted, in fact, that she's unprepared for the truck that sideswipes her into a violent wreck. Michelle wakes up in a strange cinder block room that's half gray and half painted pink in some sort of sad attempt at cheery femininity. She's hooked up to an IV drip and her leg, injured in the crash, is in a brace. But the brace is chained to the wall. Someone has saved her life but is also holding her captive. That someone is Howard Stambler. Howard soon explains that he's taken Michelle into his private underground bunker in the aftermath of some sort of attack. He's fuzzy on the details, muttering theories about everything from Russians to Martians. Howard has known for years that something was coming, though, and has been preparing for this day. Michelle's room, we gradually learn, was supposed to be for his daughter Megan. Why isn't Megan here instead? According to Howard, her mother turned her against him. It's an explanation couched in the disturbingly familiar language of abuse. Before she can come to any conclusions about whether or not she trusts Howard, Michelle becomes aware of a third person in their midst. Emmett is a young man who helped build Howard's bunker and made his way to it as soon as loud sounds and lights in the sky signal the onslaught of whatever invasion has occurred. Friendly and naive, Emmett quickly becomes Michelle's ally in solving the bunker's mysteries. It may not be immediately clear, but Emmett serves a few functions in the story. His most obvious purpose is to give Michelle support and someone to talk to as she navigates her situation. He also provides some important exposition, informing Michelle that Howard was always known for his doomsday prepper mentality and eventually sharing an important revelation about a photo that Howard claims is of his daughter Megan. Most ominously, it's significant that Howard seems to barely tolerate Emmett's presence. Howard's consistent irritation toward Emmett suggests that he has more specific goals with the bunker than saving lives. Unsurprisingly, Michelle remains hesitant to trust the man who chained her to a wall and told her Martians may have attacked. She remains not entirely convinced by his stories, even after he brings her to the bunker's heavy locked door to show her a pair of mutilated pigs outside, as evidence of what the air itself will do to anyone who breathes it. So, at the first opportunity, she bashes him in the head, grabs his keys, and makes a break for the door. But before she can open it, she's met by a woman begging to be let in, screaming and desperate as the skin seemingly melts from her face. Fully convinced that the air outside is indeed dangerous, Michelle resigns herself to remaining in the bunker. The decision is made easier by a seemingly softened attitude from Howard, who talks her through the process of stitching up the head injury she caused while sharing stories about his time in the Navy. They soon enough move on from the disturbing death they've witnessed, but the memory lingers over the film until the very end. As the only two people who can relate to each other, Michelle and Emmett naturally end up sharing stories about their lives before the bunker. They talk about tattoos they've always wanted, with Emmett saying that he would have gotten plenty if he had known the attack was going to happen. When asked if he has any regrets, Howard replies,
"Everything I wanted to do, I did. I focused on being prepared, and I was. And here we are."
Later, after the occurrence with the woman at the door, Emmett tries to comfort Michelle by assuring her that there was nothing she could have done to help. This brings up more talk of regrets. Michelle is haunted by the time she saw a little girl being abused by her father and did nothing to help, while Emmett's life was changed when a lack of confidence stopped him from getting on a bus to start college at Louisiana Tech. Michelle and Emmett settle in for life with Howard, though the peace remains uneasy. In a particularly uncomfortable game night, Howard fails to associate the word woman with Michelle, struggling with words like girl and princess. It's a disturbing indication of how much he's infantilized her. The tension comes to a head when Michelle, tasked with crawling through the bunker's vents to fix an air filter, discovers a window to the outside into which someone has scratched the word help. Nearby, she finds a bloody earring, which she recognizes from Howard's photo of Megan. But when she shows the picture to Emmett, he recognizes the girl not as Megan, but as a classmate of his sister's who disappeared from the area some time back. Regardless of how correct he might be about the dangers outside, it's now clear to Michelle and Emmett how dangerous Howard is. He's been using the bunker to hold young women captive in a deluded attempt to replace his daughter, and Michelle is next. Michelle has a plan. She envisions a makeshift hazmat suit envisioned from the bunker's shower curtain and various household items. She and Emmett begin assembling the materials while evading Howard's notice. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for long, and Howard calls the two of them up to help him move a barrel. Inside the barrel is an acid capable of dissolving human bodies down to the bone. Howard makes it clear that he knows that Michelle and Emmett are up to something, and that if they don't confess, they'll end up in the barrel. Emmett accepts all responsibility for the plan, and Howard accepts his apology by calmly shooting him in the head. Howard insists to a shocked Michelle that, like everything else, he's done this to protect her. Soon after, he undergoes some sort of bizarre dad transformation, appearing clean-shaven and neatly dressed for the first time as he offers Michelle ice cream. The uneasy tension of his demeanor has been replaced by an even more terrifying sense of total, unchallenged delusion. But Michelle's real call to action comes in a silent scene that finds her going through Emmett's belongings and finding the bus tickets to Louisiana Tech he's been holding on to for all these years. Her resolve is bolstered. With the uncertainty of the world outside, leaving the bunker is less about saving her own life than it is about not letting regret define her death. The film's climax kicks off when Howard discovers Michelle's nearly complete hazmat suit, and she narrowly escapes his wrath by momentarily trapping him in her room. When he breaks free and corners her near the perchloric acid, she has no choice but to push a barrel over, starting a fire as soon as the acid hits an electrical outlet. Fleeing through the vents from a burned and furious Howard, Michelle uses the can of liquid nitrogen to break the exit's massive padlock and at last escape. This final flight out of the bunker is fast and intense, but a careful retracing of the movie's plot reveals just how much of it has been set up all along. Michelle has successfully constructed a hazmat suit, thanks to her interest in fashion design that's part of her character from the very beginning. Her knowledge of the ventilation layout is established by the earlier filter repair sequence, one of the film's most intense moments in its own right. And the liquid nitrogen trick was subtly foreshadowed by Howard's casual aside about doing the same thing in the Navy. Michelle has spent her time in captivity learning everything she needed to survive. In the open air of Howard's farm, Michelle briefly panics when a hole tears in her suit, but the sight of birds flocking overhead unharmed tips her off that the air may not be as toxic as she believed. Sure enough, she removes her makeshift plastic bottle face mask and can breathe without trouble. But then a horn sounds nearby, alerting her to the presence of an enormous alien craft sailing over the crops. As darkness falls, another ship rises up from behind the house, and an enormous tentacled beast emerges. Michelle takes shelter in Howard's truck, and though the creature lifts it up and nearly devours her, she has one more trick up her sleeve. And it's yet another plot point set up in the movie's earliest scenes. With a bottle of whiskey she took with her when she left home, she fashions a Molotov cocktail that not only burns the alien, but causes a chain reaction with the gases in its body, obliterating the monster in a huge explosion. The most important reason for 10 Cloverfield Lane's surprising final sequence, though, is to bring Michelle's character arc to a significant final moment. She commandeers the car left behind by the woman at the bunker's door, at first following radio instructions for survivors to gather at Baton Rouge. Her escape is interrupted by another radio message.
But if you have any medical training or combat experience, we need help.
Silently reflecting on how everything that's happened to her has given her exactly the necessary skills, she turns toward Houston as stormy skies reveal more ships looming in the distance. The movie ends on this moment of decision with our heroine barreling toward danger. It's far more than an open-ended sequel setup, however. It's the first time Michelle is committed to facing a problem head-on instead of running from danger or difficulty. We've watched her go from a scared, uncertain person racked with regret to a decisive, competent hero ready to give herself over to a noble cause. Everything about her time in the bunker, her battle with Howard, and her honesty with Emmett has brought her to this place.
Terminator Dark Fate has arrived, and it's safe to say that fans have a lot of questions, which works out really well because we happen to have a lot of answers. Answers that require spoilers, of course. With that warning, let's break down the ending of Terminator Dark Fate. The first 2/3 of Terminator Dark Fate set the table. A new evil Terminator model called the Rev 9 has been sent from the future to kill a Mexican woman named Daniela. Luckily, someone also sent back a bionic woman from the future named Grace to protect her. Along with Sarah Connor, looking to get revenge after her son John was killed by a Terminator, they end up finding help from a very unlikely source. Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800, who has been stuck in the past since killing John after the events of Terminator 2. The real surprise here, though, is that this Terminator has voluntarily given up the terminating business and has settled down in a human life under the name Carl. He embodies the core message from T2, that people can choose their own fate and rewrite their future. He decided to stop being an evil killing machine and instead become a nurturing father figure. It's an unexpected twist that suggests humans and robots may actually be able to live together in peace after all, if the robots simply choose a different path. One of the big mysteries in Terminator Dark Fate is just why the robots have sent their agent back in time to kill Danny. During the final chase scene, though, Grace reveals the truth, that Danny herself actually becomes the resistance leader in the future. As Sarah puts it, she's the new John Connor, the last best hope for all mankind. Like Carl, Danny's character arc also reinforces the idea that you can choose your own fate. Several times in the film, the others urge her to run and hide, but she instead insists on fighting back. She chooses to become the hero humanity needs, and indeed, it's those choices that actually make her a hero. It's a real contrast to John, who often seemed to reject the role of savior, only reluctantly being pressed into it by circumstance. John, as a character, seemed consigned by fate, while Danny chooses her own path.
I want to stand and fight.
The last third of Terminator Dark Fate is essentially one giant, never-ending action sequence that involves car chases, helicopters, multiple plane crashes, gunfights, and a Humvee getting swept over a dam, leading to an underwater brawl. It's such a whirlwind of non-stop excitement that you may not have noticed it's all very, very familiar. Basically, every action beat in Terminator Dark Fate is based off of something from a previous Terminator installment. In a way, that's thematically appropriate. Even though Sarah successfully destroyed Skynet in T2, which should have led to a happy future, we learn instead that Skynet was just replaced by a new AI called Legion. The details of the future are different, but the outline is still the same. Just as the details of Dark Fate are different from the previous films, but the plot is still the same. The message now seems to be the opposite of T2. In Dark Fate, no matter what you do, nothing ever really changes your destiny. In the climax of the film, the whole team of good guys faces off against the Rev 9, which seems unfair until you consider the Rev 9 has the ability to split into two different self-sufficient robots, a metal exoskeleton like the T-800 and a fluid form like the T-1000. The only way the good guys are able to win is by Grace sacrificing herself so Danny can take Grace's power source and jam it into Rev 9's eye hole, causing it to melt down. As it happens, fans have seen this before because that's almost exactly how Arnold's good guy Terminator defeated the evil TX in Terminator 3. He removes his power core and shoves it in the TX's mouth, whereupon it explodes and destroys both of them. We're not sure if this is a loving homage to Terminator 3 or if they just assumed everyone had forgotten Terminator 3 existed at all. Either could be true. With the power core delivered to the Rev 9's head, there's just one last thing that needs to happen. A sad descent into the pit where both the villainous Rev 9 and the heroic T-800 model known as Carl blink their final blinky lights. It's sad, or at least it's supposed to be sad because it's very intentionally calling back memories of the infamous ending of T2. You remember that one, right? It's the one with the thumbs up. It's obvious director Tim Miller is hoping the memory of T2's tearjerker ending will add some much-needed gravitas to the climax of Terminator Dark Fate. Avengers Endgame isn't the only action movie this year that gets its emotional resonance from the films that came before.
I love you 3000.
That's not the final moving moment designed to play on people's emotions, though. The final scene of Terminator Dark Fate is designed to deliver a double subliminal whammy to anyone who has seen Terminator and T2. Danny and Sarah Connor are at a playground, where they watch a young and oblivious Grace playing with her family. After Danny vows to make sure Grace doesn't have to sacrifice herself, she and Sarah jump in a waiting vehicle and drive off to prepare for the impending Armageddon. The playground element, of course, is a clear reference to the infamous playground scene in T2, where Sarah Connor watches families get incinerated by the Skynet-caused nuclear holocaust. And the riding into the sunset ending is exactly the same as the end of the first Terminator film. Only this time, instead of being pregnant with the future savior of humanity that she has to train, Sarah Connor is riding shotgun with her. Structurally, Terminator Dark Fate is almost identical to the original Terminator film, in much the same way that Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, is a soft reboot of the original Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. So we actually have a pretty good idea where they could go with the next film in the series, a new version of T2. Sure, the plot would actually have to be different, but the main thrust of T2 was the attempt to prevent Armageddon by destroying Skynet. In Dark Fate, they don't ever have the chance to even think about stopping the apocalypse, but they could certainly try to take steps in Terminator 7 to prevent the new AI, Legion, from coming to be. One thing is for sure, we can't wait to find out which beloved scenes from the previous Terminator films they'll remake in the next one.
When the Netflix original film The Platform dropped in February 2020, the Spanish horror thriller quickly generated a ton of buzz for its unique dystopian setting and the prescient symbolism at the core of the narrative. At first glance, the film appears to be a story of individual greed and the struggle to survive. But as the movie reaches its haunting conclusion, it becomes clear that there's something deeper going on. At the outset of The Platform, we're introduced to Goring, a new inmate in a vertical prison. At the top, a team of chefs prepare a lavish feast big enough to feed everyone in the hundreds of cells below, and each day, the titular platform containing the food is lowered. The platform stops at each cell for 2 minutes, and the 2 prisoners in that cell can eat as much or as little as they want. Of course, those at the top get their fill, while those at the bottom are left with nothing and end up starving. The catch is that the prisoners are assigned a new cell each month, rearranging the pecking order in relation to the platform. The ambiguous ending of the platform and the film's metaphorical nature throughout have left many viewers trying to figure out what it all means. Let's run through the symbolism of the movie and what message the filmmakers wanted us to take away from the final moments. We get bits of details about what the purpose of the prison is throughout, but it's not until Goring meets Emma Geary, who worked for the prison herself before becoming an inmate, that we get a more concrete idea. Emma Geary tells Goring that the administration prefers to refer to the pit-like prison as a vertical self-management center, or VSC. She explains that in order for the food to reach all the way down to the lowest levels, there needs to be a spontaneous sense of solidarity, meaning everyone without communicating to one another only takes as much as they need. She seems to imply that the whole purpose of the prison is to create a system in which people can learn to foster this spontaneous sense of solidarity. However, Goring proposes a more sinister interpretation.
If that solidarity emerged, they would know how to avoid it from happening outside, wouldn't they?
According to Goring's interpretation of the prison, it's a small-scale model of a harsh capitalist system that the ruling class is using to test the responses of the proletariat. It's a tool for the rulers, not society as a whole. Most of the main characters we meet in the platform represent archetypes or ideas larger than themselves. For instance, Goring, who volunteers to enter the pit in order to obtain a college diploma, represents an idealistic intellectual. At the beginning of the film, he shames the greed of those who take more than their share when they have the opportunity, but doesn't understand why they do it, as he has yet to spend a month at the bottom of the pit. Similarly, Emma Geary represents a willfully ignorant bureaucrat upon which a system like the VSC rely in order to function. When Emma Geary enters the pit, it's revealed that she's mostly in the dark as to what exactly happens in there. Like Goring, she attempts to convince the prisoners below her to ration their food, but they don't listen to her pleas. Perhaps the most enigmatic character in the platform is Maharu, a mute woman who rides the platform each month in search of her young child. Maharu is disdained by the fellow prisoners and is often attacked. Even Emma Geary derides her struggle, claiming that her search for her child is a lie because nobody under 16 is allowed in the pit. Maharu represents those who suffer on the periphery of society, whose stories we don't want to believe because they sound so cruel that we can't imagine that we live in the same system. For instance, people experiencing homelessness or other forms of extreme poverty. At the end of the film, we learn that Maharu's child is real and has been living at the very bottom of the pit. Goring arrives there after riding the platform down with a weapon, enforcing the rationing of the food by beating and killing anyone who tries to take more than their share. His plan is to return back to the top level with an uneaten dessert, a symbol that the prisoners have learned how to work together to survive in such a way. However, after finding the child, Goring realizes that that isn't the message he needs to send. The discovery of Maharu's child is confirmation of the most important component of the VSC experiment. Those in power set the rules, but they clearly don't follow them themselves. Although they've assured everyone they would never do something as cruel as allow a child into such a horrendous existence, that was a lie. The conclusion of the platform sees Goring sending the child back up on the platform as a message to the chefs at the top, who are presumably in a similar state of ignorance as Emma Geary. Instead of proving to them that the prisoners can adapt to the system, he wants to show them that the system itself is unspeakably and unfathomably cruel, and those operating it cannot be trusted. Ad Astra sends Brad Pitt to the far reaches of space on a quest for his father, the truth, and a sense of deeper meaning. If you're wondering what it all adds up to, let's break down the ending and major takeaways of Ad Astra. After Spacecom determines that Clifford McBride is likely behind the destructive antimatter pulse that kicks off the movie's plot, his son Roy is dispatched on a mission to Mars in an effort to establish communication with the elder McBride. Roy ends up journeying all the way to Neptune, where he discovers that Spacecom was right. His father is still alive, and was at least partly responsible for the antimatter surge. The surge came after the crew of his station staged a deadly mutiny, irrevocably damaging the battery powering the station. But the true tragedy, at least in Clifford's eyes, is a result of all their research, which shows no sign of intelligent alien life in the universe. Although the Lemur project compiled reams of data about outlying planets and systems, it didn't find what Clifford was really looking for. Clifford was so determined to find new life that he was willing to abandon his family and even kill for it. Although the information he did gather is valuable, for him, it's not enough. Roy McBride is uniquely qualified for the mission to determine the fate of Project Lemur. There's his family connection to the project's long-lost leader, and the fact that he is, like Neil Armstrong was described to be, an almost supernaturally reserved man. Even working in dangerous conditions in deep space, his pulse goes no higher than 80 BPM, and he deals with the bad news about his father with a steely calm.
Now we're counting on you to help us find him. Are you with us?
Yes, I am, sir.
It's this quality that comes in extra handy when Roy realizes what Spacecom is really up to. Specifically, the agency is out to double-cross him and kill Clifford. The secret plan all along is to observe Roy's attempt to establish communication with Clifford, using Clifford's response to figure out where he is, and then travel there to finish him off with a nuclear weapon. Once he figures it out, Roy proves more than a match for the other team, successfully sabotaging their mission before journeying to Neptune in peace. The central message of Ad Astra is best summed up by Roy's words to his father just before they leave Project Lima. Roy tells his father that what Cliff has proven, that there's no alien life to be found, is just as important as finding another world full of intelligence. By learning there is no intelligent life in the known universe, Cliff has shown us that, as Roy puts it, we're all we've got. Speaking to Digital Spy, writer-director James Gray explained that the idea of looking for answers in alien life isn't a particularly appealing idea to him. Gray said, "The idea that there's these little green men out there that'll either save us or eat us, to me, that's more horrifying than having to rely on other people." With the Lima project's antimatter battery damaged, the station is a lost cause, actively endangering life on other planets as it breaks down. Clifford can't repair it, but thankfully, Roy has arrived with a solution of sorts. The nuclear bomb Spacecom intended to use on Clifford. After getting his father out of the station, Roy uses the bomb for part of its intended purpose, blowing up the station and getting rid of the battery. It's an ignominious end for Lima Project, which sets out on a hopeful mission before spiraling into madness, violence, and catastrophic loss of life. Clifford ran away from Earth hoping to find answers, but ended up creating more problems, underlining one of the movie's major themes. Running away from problems we're meant to face head-on can only lead to disappointment. Somewhere between Earth and Neptune, it seems pretty obvious that Cliff McBride has lost his freaking mind. But one of the interesting things about Ad Astra is that with Roy's voyage, we get to follow in Cliff's footsteps and see exactly how his marbles spilled out. Roy's narration tells us there are physical strains affecting his mental health, like the extended time spent in zero gravity. There's also the crushing isolation of space, something Roy commits to facing as he continues on his quest to find his father, going past the moon, past Mars, and then all the way to Neptune.
Are you ready? I'm ready.
Roy's journey mirrors what must have been his father's in a lot of ways, including the death toll. When Roy reaches his father, we learn the antimatter surges aren't something Cliff has been causing on purpose. His struggles against his crew, he says, caused the damage that led to the antimatter instability. This is something Roy is familiar with, because his trek through the stars has left its own trail of collateral damage. With few exceptions, just about everyone who has been at Roy's side throughout his journey is dead by the end of the movie. Though he doesn't mean for it to happen, he indirectly causes the death of the surviving crew on the ship to Neptune, just as Cliff indirectly unleashes the antimatter surge that threatens the solar system. After they escape Project Lima, Cliff detaches himself from Roy, guaranteeing his own certain death. He has more than a few reasons for doing it. First, there are the consequences he might have to face upon returning to Earth. He doesn't know that his crimes have been swept under the rug, and so has no reason to think he'll be shown any mercy. Second, while he may refuse to admit it to himself, what he calls his destiny has proven to be a sham. Considering everything he's done for that destiny, how could he not want to end things? Finally, as he tells Roy, this lonely void has become his home. He has no desire to return to Earth. Ad Astra has been compared to a number of classic movies, from the awe and wonder of 2001: A Space Odyssey, the character study of First Man, and the grounded thrills of Gravity. It's also drawn comparisons to Apocalypse Now, in the way Roy is drawn deeper and deeper into space on his dangerous quest. But Ad Astra is fundamentally about the desire for connection between parents and their offspring, and between people in general, and the dark places people can be driven to when that connection is lost.
It's a very human story dealing with our connection to humanity.
In many ways, Roy McBride's journey is a terribly sad one. He's betrayed by his employers and faced with the reality of his father's crimes, potential insanity, and then death. He loses the parent he journeyed billions of miles to save. But in spite of that loss, the movie's message remains hopeful. As Roy tells Clifford, we're all we've got, and those bonds are strong enough to take us all to Neptune and back.
Denis Villeneuve's sci-fi drama Arrival hit theaters in 2016 and earned rave reviews from critics, thanks to Amy Adams' brilliant performance, Villeneuve's excellent direction, and a mature, focused take on the alien invasion genre. But that doesn't mean it isn't confusing. In fact, Arrival's focus on linguistics and space-time theory is tough to untangle, and only seems to get more complex the deeper you dive into it. But we've got you covered. If you're ready to dig deep and don't mind spoilers, here's everything you need to know about Arrival's confusing ending. The Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis. If you want to understand this complex film, first you need to wrap your head around the linguistic theory at the center of it, which holds that our perception of reality is either altered or determined by the language we speak. An example of the hypothesis in action, the Hungarian word for raccoon, an animal that doesn't exist in Central Europe outside of television and zoos, is moso medved, which literally translates to washing bear. The idea is that Hungarians' colorful term for raccoons also affects their perception of the creature itself, so that they can see and understand it differently than those of us who just call a raccoon, or a trash panda. Rewiring Louise's brain. So, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis states that our reality is determined by our language. In Arrival, that argument is pushed to its outer limits. Dr. Louise Banks is the one who first begins to truly learn and comprehend the heptapod's strange, non-linear mode of communication. Thus, she's also the first to perceive reality, space, and time the same way the aliens do. The total overhaul of Louise's reality begins shortly after she teaches the heptapods her and Ian's names. While dissecting some printouts of the alien language, she has this vision of her daughter playing with a caterpillar in a field, a moment easily dismissed as a random memory of the daughter she lost. But these flashbacks intensify and appear more frequently as she learns more of the heptapod's language, leading to a bombshell moment in which what seem like memories are now revealed to be visions of Louise's future.
I don't understand. Who is this child?
Weapon opens time. Dr. Banks' job is to find out why the heptapods came to Earth, leading to a global international crisis when the heptapods say that they're here to, quote, give weapon. But what Louise realizes is that the aliens don't really mean weapon. They mean tool, and the tool they intend to give humanity is their language, which will come in handy 3,000 years from now when the heptapods face extinction and need humanity's help. Since people who speak heptapod experience time in non-linear form, they're capable of drawing on experiences from anywhere within their own existence to make choices and change events. That's how Louise is able to flash forward 18 months to the gala, where she encounters Chinese General Shang, who tells her what she said to him to stop him from starting a war of the worlds in the present. And since Shang has learned to speak heptapod himself in those intervening months, he also perceives time non-linearly, so he knows that what he tells Louise in his timeline will be useful to her past self. Confused? Let Russ Cole help you out.
We see our space-time would look flattened.
Heptapod time is like that beer can, a flat circle. And on a flat circle, cause and effect can happen in any direction. What Louise says to Shang leads him to speak to her at the gala. But what Shang says to Louise at the gala also leads her to say what she said. And that makes perfect sense, as long as you accept one more hypothesis. Everything is predetermined. Needless to say, Louise returns from her mental flash forward to make the phone call that saves the world, and everyone lives happily, or tragically, ever after. But what if she simply chose not to? That's the bad news. She can't choose.
Now you know.
In order for that future conversation at the gala to happen, and it does, Louise has to follow through on the phone call. This is the other big difference between linear and non-linear time. In linear time, you can make choices that alter the shape of your future. You might be able to move in only one direction, but every choice you make represents a fork in the road. In non-linear time, life is a circular track on which you can travel either backward or forwards, but there's no branching off. The existence of free will is fundamentally incompatible with a non-linear experience of time, which is also the heart of Arrival. Speaking heptapod gives Louise the ability to see the future, but shatters her illusions of ever being able to change it.
Moonfall is a movie about the moon collapsing onto Earth, and that's the simple part. We haven't even gotten to the swarm of AI robots yet.
It's on airplane mode.
Moonfall begins when a routine space mission goes awry with two astronauts, Brian Harper and Joe Fowler, barely surviving what Brian can only describe as an attack from an unidentified source. Joe, having been unconscious, assumes the assault was some kind of solar flare. The disagreement leaves the colleagues and friends estranged, with Brian becoming a washed-up deadbeat to his only son, Sonny, while Joe moves up the NASA ladder. 10 years later, a conspiracy theorist named KC discovers that the moon has been knocked off its orbital path and is on a collision course with Earth. He winds up teaming up with the two former friends to figure out how to correct the moon's course, but they both balk at his theory that the moon isn't what it seems. They begin to grow more sympathetic to his crackpot theories when Joe is promoted to head of NASA and given clearance to see the original footage from her and Brian's botched mission. There she meets a mysterious spook named Holdenfield who explains he's been responsible for covering up the truth about the moon since Earth's earliest expeditions. Joe starts to come around to the craziness when she witnesses with her own eyes the phenomenon that Brian tried to get her to believe, a heart-stopping swarm of black nanomachines. She surmises that whatever this entity is, its presence is what set the moon out of alignment. If Earth is to be saved, it needs to be dealt with. But even though NASA's top brass have been aware of the moon not being what it seemed for decades, they don't know its true nature. All they know is that whatever it is, it's more advanced than humanity can handle. Initially, in response to the moon threat, Joe had scrambled an emergency mission with the help of some European allies. The intent of the mission was to see what's inside the 26-kilometer deep crater on the moon that the black swarm had come out of. But that mission killed everyone involved, so Plan B has to be a little more drastic. With no faith or support from the rest of the government and very little resources at their disposal, Joe has to bring in Brian, who encountered the entity before, and Casey, whose status as a megastructurist might prove useful, especially now that she knows most of the accepted knowledge surrounding the moon is completely useless. The new plan is to get a lander onto the moon's surface equipped with a super powerful EMP the military had been developing for years to deal with NASA's secret moon problem. The project had been abandoned as too costly, but one working prototype still exists, which is what ends up being used in an attempt to destroy the black swarm. As the moon's gravitational pull and exponential velocity increases, the plan starts to look impossible to pull off. The one usable rocket loses one of its engines. The moon itself begins to fall apart as it gets closer to Earth's atmosphere, sending debris all across the landscape. But the gravity tsunami that the moon brings with it proves to be useful in getting a rocket out of orbit, even without the engine thrust necessary to get the rocket to properly launch. Unfortunately, this scientific revelation comes after everyone working for NASA has been released to go home and find shelter with their loved ones, leaving the film's three leads to embark on this insane mission alone. With the original Plan B already looking like a failure, the military-industrial complex gets hard at work on a much more logical solution to this absurd problem. They're going to nuke the moon. This adds extra pressure onto Joe and Brian's mission as they're stranded out in space, unsure of whether their cowboy maneuvers will even work, and if they do, they have no way to communicate with the military to stop them from nuking the moon to smithereens. But Joe does have one contact on the inside, as her ex-husband Doug is with the Joint Chiefs in the Colorado Doomsday bunker Joe was supposed to bring their son to. Compared to Joe and Brian, Doug is a straightforward guy who isn't exactly thrilled at the nuke the moon plan, but in the absence of better, more concrete plans, sees it as humanity's only chance to keep from having the moon hitting everyone's eyes like a big pizza pie. If only he had some way to know that his ex-wife's long-shot plan of getting a rocket into space actually worked. Luckily, Brian's son Sonny, alongside Joe and Doug's young son, saw the rocket take off. They've been driving to the Doomsday bunker themselves, running into all manner of peril. But Joe's son has a satellite phone with a direct line to his dad, so they're able to notify Doug that the mission is active. If he pulls the trigger on launching all those nukes, he'll be pulling the trigger on dooming his son to grow up without a mother. This leads to a standoff between Doug and every other authority figure in the bunker right at the moment they're meant to begin the launch sequence to initiate a nuclear onslaught on the moon. It's a crazy bit of drama because Doug doesn't understand Joe's plan, how it's going, or if it's even feasible. All he knows is that Joe has never let him down before. But the plan is essentially screwed. Brian's initial idea is to lure the black swarm out by exploiting its reaction to electricity before destroying it with the EMP, but it sees through their ruse. When it tries to destroy the ship, they realize it's not solely electricity that the swarm responds to, but rather organic matter alongside machinery. With no other recourse, Brian pilots the lander into the deep crater the swarm is retreated into, and that's where the real fun begins.
You know, we are just inside the moon. That might be the greatest sentence anyone's ever said.
The inside of the moon is, as Casey had theorized, a megastructure, an enormous vessel crafted by advanced alien life. He says some in his community believe that all megastructures are arcs, but what they discover next proves he's only half right. As the swarm tries to destroy them, there is another opposing force within the moon's core, one that takes over the controls of the ship and guides them to safety on the other side of a blast door, an area they discover that has air. When Casey and Joe wake from the crash, they discover Brian is missing and go exploring this newfound space. But Brian is already communing with an entity that possesses all the answers. It speaks to him in the guise of his son, but it's the operating system for the supermachine that is the moon. It's a megastructure, but it wasn't created by aliens, it was made by humans. As told to Brian, the moon is an ark created by a form of the human race that was far more advanced than ourselves. They had created a utopian society and proliferated throughout the cosmos. But one day, the artificial intelligence they had created to help run this society grew sentient, turned on them, and vowed to destroy all of humanity. They created moons to find suitable places to build new planets to be seeded with human life. Our Earth is only one successful settlement created from the moon and seeded with human DNA. The moon orbits the Earth to protect it should the AI swarm ever find it, as it has now. The operating system tries to understand why Brian is so willing to risk his life to save the rest of the planet, and his answer, about love for his own son and for his race, lets the moon know he's ready to get back into the game and stop the AI. It supercharges their ship, gives Brian what can only be described as temporary superpowers, and sets him out to get into a dogfight at the moon's core with a malevolent swarm of human-hating nanomachines. The ensuing laser battle culminates in the realization that one of them is going to have to stay behind in the lander to detonate the EMP and put a stop to the swarm for good. Brian has decided to sacrifice himself, but someone else has other plans. Casey, a man who has spent his whole life having his scientific beliefs treated like a joke, who no one ever thought would amount to anything, has finally gotten to see space and see his research and life's work validated. Casey has, in the last few days of the film's narrative, lived more of an exciting life than he previously had in all his prior years combined. That's why he can't let Brian or Joe stay behind when they have children on Earth that need them. Brian must go back now as the main conduit to the moon's deep reservoir of knowledge regarding humanity's secret history. Casey is going to stay behind and culminate the unlikely journey he embarked upon at the film's introduction. He sacrifices himself, defeating the swarm and making it possible for Brian and Joe to reunite with their families on Earth. His sacrifice doesn't seem to be permanent. As the film closes, Casey rematerializes in the same space Brian learned about the moon's true origins. Only now, the operating system presents itself as Casey's mother and his cat Fuzz Aldrin. It explains that his consciousness has been uploaded into the moon's supercomputer and that his work is far from over.
The Matrix Resurrections is a movie about making The Matrix Resurrections. We cannot emphasize this enough.
Am I crazy? We don't use that word in here.
The end of Resurrections begins with a much-anticipated sit-down between Neo and the analyst. Their venue for this meetup is the delightfully named Simulate Coffee Shop, where Thomas Anderson has received much of his stimulation over the years and inspiration via a beautiful woman named Tiffany, who bears a striking resemblance to our old friend Trinity. This Tiffany has a lot invested in the world she sees every day. She has a husband, a job, 3 children, but also a persistent feeling there must be more, as well as a relentless affection for Ducati motorcycles. At the coffee shop, Neo and the analyst finally lay all their cards on the table and decide to let her break the stalemate. If Tiffany decides to stay Tiffany, Neo will return to the Matrix once and for all and become Thomas Anderson again. If she decides to become Trinity, all bets are off. The architect, who says he likes tests, accepts, saying, "We'll let Tiff decide." Breaking down the stakes, the grown-up Sati sums up Neo's dilemma with a single line.
The most important choice in Neo's life is not his to make.
After watching Moss's character essentially being lobotomized for most of the film, what comes next is particularly satisfying. As her husband and kids make one last sales pitch, it appears that Tiffany might return home with them. Just as Neo is being dragged away, however, she delivers 4 words that trigger the film's ending, and perhaps more Matrix movies to come. My name is Trinity. One of the more welcomed upgrades in The Matrix Resurrections is the new Agent Smith. Although Hugo Weaving was nothing short of iconic in his work originating the character, Jonathan Groff does a fine job as his new face. At the end of Revolutions, it looked as if both Neo and Smith had been destroyed. With Resurrections, we once again see that Smith and Neo's fates are tied to each other. As his boss becomes his enemy, Groff's Smith takes over in the key Matrix role of engaging Neo in multiple high-powered, memorable smackdowns. By the end of the film, it looks as if Smith might have been eradicated. But when Neo and Trinity need saving, Smith once again returns from the dead, this time to fight on their side. He substantially aids their efforts in the Simulate coffee shop. Then, vanishing once again, he points out to our heroes, anyone could be you, whereas I've always been anyone. What follows is all the butt-kicking, bullet-dodging, aerial acrobatic choreography you would expect from a Matrix film. this time with Neo and Trinity backed up by a new crew led by Bugs. As the group make their way out of the Simulate, the analyst turns the Matrix against these viruses threatening his creation. In essence, every human in the area turns into a quasi-zombie, attempting to take down the heroes. When Trinity shows up on a Ducati and has Neo hop on board, this sequence gets particularly striking, as in hundreds of bodies striking the streets down below, diving out skyscraper windows and essentially turning themselves into bombs attempting to hit Trinity and Neo as they speed through the streets. After many close calls, explosions, and imperiled colleagues, Trinity and Neo make it to their destination. But what comes next? If people are truly to be freed, the analyst himself must be confronted. But with Neo and Trinity united again, and their minds freed, anything is possible. With that bit of business concluded and agents closing in, Neo and Trinity take to the roof of a skyscraper, where they take a great leap of faith. Throughout the Matrix Resurrections, Neo keeps seeing the same recurring image of birds in flight, flying in some sort of time loop. We are also told that Thomas Anderson tried to step off the roof of a building at a corporate party but was pulled back at the last moment, an event witnessed by Bugs. Finally, it becomes a sort of running joke throughout Resurrections that people ask Neo whether he can still fly, and he can't make it happen. All this builds to Neo and Trinity literally taking a leap of faith, stepping off the top of the building, holding hands. At first they begin to fall, and you'd be forgiven if you just assume Neo's old skills will kick in and he'll save the day. Instead, it's Trinity who discovers an ability to fly. Reminiscent of Neo soaring away at the end of the original Matrix, this time it's Trinity who takes to the sky, with Neo along for the ride. When the duo confront the analyst together, this time in his office, the power dynamic has shifted considerably. Now, instead of dictating the terms to Neo, surrounded by dozens of his agents, he is on his heels and alone. But that doesn't stop the analyst from bragging about his plans, waxing philosophic about the intrinsic shortcomings of mankind, and telling the duo time and again that their efforts are useless. As if to drive home the point that he's the one fighting the losing battle, Trinity kills the analyst, again and again, each time with him snapping back until he finally seems to admit defeat. At this point, the analyst seems to shift from saying they'll never gain control to essentially saying they'll hate the burden of having control. What are they going to do? He asks. Rebuild everything with rainbows in the skies? As he puts it, the sheeple aren't going anywhere. At this point, the newly reunited Trinity and Neo resolve to do exactly that, joking that the rainbow idea actually sounds pretty nice. If you stick around through the credits, you'll notice that when the title The Matrix Resurrections is flashed on the screen, it becomes The Matrix Resurrects. Could this be the title of the next potential film? Like the end of the original film, the final moments are soundtracked by the uplifting rebellion rock of Wake Up. Only this time, rather than the ferocious Rage Against the Machine original, the cover version you hear is by a band called Brass Against, with help from Sofia Urista. Unfortunately, the post-credit scene is a real disappointment. When the titles lift and the screen lights up again, we are transported back to Thomas Anderson's old place of work, where his team are still debating new marketing ideas and ways to make money off the Matrix franchise. As in the earlier scenes, it's all very meta. Someone says, "Face reality. Movies are dead. Games are dead. Narrative is dead." Their solution? Create programming for felines, a series of videos called the Catrix. And yeah, that's real.
Dune, titled on screen as Dune Part 1, covers roughly the first half of Frank Herbert's book, ending on something less than a cliffhanger. Until Part 2 arrives, let's talk about where Dune leaves off and how we got there in the first place. In a far-flung future, deep in space, the planet Arrakis is the center of an intergalactic empire due to its natural resource, spice, a sought-after substance integral to interstellar travel. When the film begins, that planet and its spice mining industry is lorded over by House Harkonnen and their sadistic head, Baron Harkonnen. But the Emperor gives this prestigious station to House Atreides, led by Duke Leto, leading their entire family to move from their home planet Caladan. But when they arrive on Arrakis, Leto discovers that the entire operation has been internally sabotaged. The Fremen, Arrakis' native inhabitants, still seek to overthrow the imperial power structure that oppresses them. The machinery necessary to mine spice effectively all lies in various states of disrepair, and of course, the Harkonnens left behind an assassin entrenched in the palace walls to make an attempt on the life of Leto's son, Paul. The only promising element of Leto's plans for the new planet under his charge is in his hopes to form an alliance with the Fremen, but fate has other plans. Baron Harkonnen, in collusion with the powerful religious and political sisterhood known as the Bene Gesserit, and the Emperor himself, hires the Sardaukar, the Emperor's elite fighting force, to attack House Atreides. The Sardaukar attack under the cover of night with the Harkonnens' forces led by Glasu Raban, bottlenecking them from the other end. The Baron also kidnaps the wife of Leto's doctor Wellington Yue in an effort to blackmail him into helping with this coup. The Duke and Dr. Yue are killed by the Baron, and Dr. Yue's last-ditch attempt to kill the Baron only leaves the latter wounded. But before this, Dr. Yue also helps Leto's son Paul and Paul's mother, Lady Jessica, to escape the carnage, but they are captured by the Harkonnens anyway. They are not, however, killed. As a complication from the Baron's alliance with Bene Gesserit, Jessica, part of the Sisterhood herself, and her son, who they have plans for, are to be spared. But the Harkonnens hope to abandon them in the middle of the desert, knowing there's no way for them to reasonably survive its harsh terrain. Lady Jessica and Paul are able to escape their grasp, but still find themselves stranded with only a pair of still suits to keep them alive in the heat of Arrakis. As they struggle to find shelter for the night, Jessica and Paul have to reckon with the visions he has been seeing throughout the film. Paul has been secretly raised through his training to be a mythical chosen one, a powerful being prophesized by the Sisterhood's lore. As director Denis Villeneuve said,
"Everything around Paul's future has been constructed by women."
He's basically, unwillingly, a years-long eugenics experiment with nascent superpowers destined to rule the universe one day. Meanwhile, in the present day, Paul and Jessica reunite with Duncan Idaho, Paul's mentor and friend, who has miraculously survived the attacks. He helps them get away in search of a Fremen sect to recoup and strategize with. Once there, they meet up with Dr. Liet Kynes, the ecologist assigned by the Emperor to oversee the regime change from Harkonnen to Atreides. Dr. Kynes knows that something pernicious is afoot, but can't get more involved than absolutely necessary, ultimately pledging fealty to the Fremen and neither Imperial external force. Paul has to accept that he is the head of House Atreides now and pledges to see through his father's plans for the Fremen, thinking he can work with them under the promise of freeing them from the Empire. But the Harkonnens have other plans. The Harkonnens descend on this temporary hiding place, ready to finish the job on the Fremen and the remaining Atreides survivors, but Duncan Idaho locks Jessica, Paul, and Dr. Kynes behind a stronghold door, intending to fend off the wolves at the gate by himself to save them. Throughout the film, Duncan has been his one true friend. Now Paul must run away yet again, with his mother and Dr. Kynes, as Duncan fights alone.
Duncan, can I trust you with something?
Yes, always, you know that.
Duncan goes one versus many on the invading hordes, taking out plenty of men before succumbing to mortal wounds. With no remaining friendlies on Arrakis and no other options, Paul and Jessica have to soldier on in the desert, hoping to find Fremen who may or may not be sympathetic to their cause. Jessica and Paul encounter Stilgar's sect of Fremen, who initially see them as little more than bodies of moisture to covet. Stilgar and Jamis are both in favor of just killing them and taking the water from their bodies, but Stilgar, remembering his meeting with Leto, sees some merit in sparing Paul's life. He just doesn't see that same merit in saving Jessica's. Tensions rise to a boil when moves are made to harm Jessica, who gets the upper hand on Stilgar, leading to a standoff where Paul finally meets Chani. She's the same woman he's been seeing in his visions this entire time, but Jamis can't leave this infraction alone. By besting their leader in combat, Jamis has to challenge Jessica to retain true control over their sect, so he challenges her to fight, with Paul having to step in as her champion. Paul's visions have seemingly been building to this moment. Paul and Jamis fight, with Jamis clearly the more ruthless combatant. At multiple points, Paul has Jamis dead to rights, just like in the fencing-style sparring sessions he has with Gurney Halleck in the film's first act, but this is no duel. The only way to win is to kill, which Paul finally does. This marks Paul crossing over into his destiny, finally abandoning his youth with all the tragedies that have brought him to this moment. Jessica wants Stilgar to help them get off-world, but Paul sees that their future lies here with the Fremen. As Paul, Jessica, and the Fremen traverse the desert on the way back to their stronghold, he continues to be plagued by visions. He sees his eyes glowing blue, like Chani, like the rest of the Fremen, and sees himself leading a Fremen force in a war against the rest of the Empire.
My road leads into the desert. I can see it.
Whether we will actually see the other side of this epic tale of Paul's arc from boyhood prodigy to reluctant messiah remains to be seen.
Total Recall is one of the most beloved science fiction films of the last few decades, and its ambiguous ending has led audiences to wonder, was Quaid dreaming? Or was he actually a secret agent? Here's the ending of Total Recall explained. One of the most important facts of the movie is that the plot of Total Recall identically mirrors the memory implants that Doug Quaid himself requests from the Recall organization. Quaid asked for the secret agent package.
I don't want to spoil it for you, Doug, but you rest assured, by the time the trip is over, you get the girl, kill the bad guys, and save the entire planet.
Coincidentally, Quaid realizes he was always a secret agent, gets the girl, kills the bad guy, and saves Mars. Quaid appears to wake up before the implant is actually inserted, but the salesman is very specific about the realism of the implants, and how they trick the brain into thinking it's remembering real memories. Is Quaid dreaming, or just remembering his true self? The blurring of reality and dream continues throughout the movie, with multiple villainous characters begging him to question what he believes to be the truth. Surprisingly, the villains are 100% correct. Quaid is dreaming, and the moment the camera cuts away from the start of the recall procedure, everything that follows is our visual impression of Quaid's dream. In fact, many of the movie's plot elements are culled directly from innocuous moments embedded in those few opening scenes. The recall employees even say that they combine the base program with elements from the subject's real life to better create realistic memories. The movie opens with a dream, as Quaid sees himself and a woman we'll later learn as Melina on Mars in spacesuits. Quaid slips and falls down a hill and his helmet breaks, his eyes bulging out of his skull as he wakes up, ending the dream. At the end of the film, Quaid and Melina are sucked out into the atmosphere of Mars, and his eyes bulge out of his skull in almost the same way. The recall scientists are using Quaid's dreams for potent imagery, the better to match his subconscious desires with his recall-implanted memories. Even if Quaid is actually Hauser on a deep-secret mission, it makes no sense for him to dream his own death in a way that looks identical to what actually happens. Quaid's dreaming death scene is foreshadowing for the final action set piece on Mars, a viscerally effective image that the scientists used to make the recall sequence feel even more real. This oft-overlooked detail is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that Quaid is dreaming. In the opening scenes prior to the recall procedure, he walks through an X-ray machine. We see his skeleton move through the box without alerting anyone of any hidden metals on his body. Later, after the recall procedure has begun and Quaid is running for his life, he passes through the X-ray machine again, this time setting off an alarm as it recognizes the gun he's holding. However, attentive viewers will remember that Quaid actually has a tracking chip buried in his cranium that he then has to remove to cast off his pursuers. The tracking chip is clearly made of metal, but didn't appear in the X-ray, either before or after the recall procedure. Why not? Because Quaid hadn't yet gotten to that moment in his dream. The scientists used the memory of his stroll through the machine as an action set piece, but because Quaid didn't know at the time he had a tracking chip, his subconscious mind didn't bother to change the imagery of his skeleton. Early in the film, one of Quaid's co-workers from the construction company wants him to not go to recall. He heard someone was almost lobotomized there.
Friend of mine tried one of their special offers, nearly got himself lobotomized.
Quaid ignores this warning. After the recall procedure, he discovers that his former friend is actually an undercover agent for the government tasked to keep Quaid unaware. But is he? His warning about the possibility of a lobotomy echoes throughout the visual inspirations of the movie. When Quaid pulls out his tracker chip, he pushes a tool through his nasal cavity until he hears a crunch, a strikingly similar process to original lobotomy procedures. Likewise, when a doctor shows up on Mars to tell Quaid he's having an adverse reaction to the recall procedure, he takes the tack of reminding Quaid of the possible side effects to the brain. When Cohagen is planning to swap Quaid's memories with Hauser's, the terror of the scene is that Quaid's personality will be erased, a terror shared by similar horror stories of lobotomies. Even Quaid's eye-bulging near-death scene at the end of the movie can be read as the fear of a brain aneurysm. The dangers of the recall procedure reverberate through the entire film. When Quaid is discussing the recall procedure with the salesman Bob McClane, McClane mentions their special package. This process involves taking on a new identity, and Quaid bristles against it. He still wants to be him, but he's tempted by the secret agent option. He eventually takes it once McClane gives him the hard sell, but his initial discomfort at being someone else becomes sublimated into the recall procedure. Quaid, as we find out later in the film, is also Hauser, a secret agent and one of Cohagen's right-hand men. Quaid has to struggle against being reimplanted with Hauser's personality, perfectly mirroring his own discomfort with the recall procedure's multiple identities option. Quaid wanted to remain true to himself while still taking advantage of the secret agent module of the recall procedure, and that manifests in his battle with the Hauser personality. Hauser allows him to be both a secret agent deep undercover while still remaining the same person he was before being woke up from that deep cover. Melina is a mysterious woman who first appears in Quaid's dream that opens the film. She's given no dialogue or personality, just a face in an astronaut suit. Later, when Quaid goes to recall, they ask him to describe his perfect woman, encouraging him to be as honest as possible to have more fun in the implanted memories. Quaid describes the woman who is, quote, brunette, athletic, sleazy, and demure. And before he passes out, he sees that the scientists are sculpting Melina's face. We know from the beginning that the scientists are combing through Quaid's dreams to better fit him for an implant. While Melina's face appearing on the television could be interpreted as Quaid's hallucination, we know it to be a product of the scientist's technology. Melina herself, as we later find out, works in a brothel, is athletic, and is both demure and sleazy. She perfectly matches the personality type Quaid wants to appear in his recall memories. Laurie, Quaid's wife, is against recall and Mars altogether. When Quaid is enacting his secret agent fantasy, he imagines her as a mole for Cohagen. That he positions her as a villain when she's so against him wasting money on a dangerous procedure or a vacation to a war zone makes perfect sense. Her convenient secret marriage to Cohagen's Lieutenant Richter allows Quaid to freely pursue Melina without having to worry about any sort of guilt for breaking his marriage vows. As an added bonus, she consistently compliments his masculinity and sexual prowess, even when she's an enemy. Quaid can't help but use her to prop up his own ego. While the sales agent boasts to Quaid that recall implants are better than a regular vacation, he lists a litany of annoyances that their service avoids.
You got lost luggage, lousy weather, crooked taxi drivers. When you travel with recall, everything is perfect.
When Quaid is on Mars later in the film, he gets a ride from the ultimate crooked taxi driver, Benny, a cabbie who has a deal with a specific establishment that gives him a cut of the profits if he brings tourists there. But that's not all. Later in the film, Benny is revealed as a double agent for Cohagen, tasked with discovering the secret mutant freedom fighter's lair. Benny's presence serves as a balm for Quaid's worried mind. If this were a real recall procedure, then there wouldn't be any crooked cabbies, just like McClane explained earlier in the film. By the time Quaid reaches Mars, his mind has started to protect him from the possibility that the recall procedure is going very wrong. Laurie shows up again when Quaid is confronted by Dr. Edgemar, who warns Quaid he's in danger of suffering a schizoid embolism, and he's trapped within the dream. He says he and Laurie, the real actual Mrs. Quaid, have gone into Quaid's fantasy to pull him out before further damage occurs. He warns Quaid that the recall fantasy will become so jumbled that the, quote, walls of reality will break down.
1 minute you'll be the savior of the rebel cause, and the next thing you know, you'll be Cohagen's bosom buddy. You'll even have fantasies about alien civilizations.
Edgemar continues to say that if this fantasy continues, Quaid will be lobotomized back on Earth. Quaid thinks Edgemar is a plant and shoots them both. But the doctor is right. The walls of reality and the hotel literally break down as Cohagen's men burst in. Shortly after, the mutant leader Quarto is murdered, leaving Quaid as the leader of the rebellion, just as Cohagen bursts in to deliver the news that Quaid is actually Hauser, his right-hand man. The doctor's prediction was exactly right. As the scientists are preparing Quaid for the recall procedure in the beginning of the film, one of them notices something odd in Quaid's dreams. He tells the other lab worker,
Ernie? That's a new one. Blue sky on Mars.
He's referring to the blue sky that ends the film, just as Quaid wonders if he's actually dreaming. And he is. The scientists have never heard of a blue sky on Mars before they put Quaid under, and their acknowledgement of its significance is what allows them to create a soothing ending for Quaid's recall dream. Likewise, in the lab scene, the secret alien arc reactor can be spotted flashing across the screen before Quaid's put under. One of the scientists also makes the observation that, quote, it's all about alien artifacts these days. It makes no sense for the recall officers to actually have access to the alien artifacts that Cohagen is obsessed with keeping to himself. It appears on the monitor because it's part of Quaid's streaming package. and they're prepping the operation. Director Paul Verhoeven himself backed that up on the DVD commentary, saying, "All the images of the tubes that you just saw are of course the tubes that you see at the end of the movie when the nuclear reactor starts." But if all of that evidence can't convince you, then maybe the director's words will. Paul Verhoeven lays out the clues that point to the dream interpretation on the DVD commentary of the movie, starting at the moment that Quaid drifts off to sleep after seeing Melina's face on the monitor. Be aware that if everything that happens in the movie from now on is going to be a dream, if there is no reality to anything, realize that the dream really starts at the moment that he falls asleep. So the next scene, which seems to be a f*** up of the machine, is part of the dream. Verhoeven continues, so this is the last moment of his reality, goes into the unconsciousness, and basically from now on, boom, the dream starts. That's the trick of the company, that they make a dream that's so convincing that it seamlessly goes from the first reality into the second one.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.